The rain on Vielle did not fall. It drifted, suspended in the heavy, humid air like sheets of silver silk, smelling faintly of ionized metal and deep ocean salt. From the obsidian balcony of the Ministry of Public Order, Ilara watched the capital city breathe. It was a metropolis of floating towers anchored over black water, their spires connected by bridges of solid light that pulsed with the rhythm of the tide. Holographic advertisements, shaped like colossal drifting jellyfish, swam lazily between the skyscrapers, illuminating the wet darkness with washes of neon violet and electric blue. Ilara adjusted the collar of her enforcement weave. It was a sleek, bioluminescent armor that clung to her pale skin, marking her as a liaison of the Third Circle. She was stunning in the terrifying way a storm is stunning, tall, poised, with eyes the color of sea glass that missed nothing. She was a weapon wrapped in diplomacy, trained to keep the peace between the high-caste Vielle clans and the off-world traders who docked at the orbital anchors. But tonight, the peace was fragile. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the damp wind cool her face. Inside her mind, the doctrine repeated itself, a rhythmic chant she had memorized before she could walk. Humans are volatile, their lives are sparks, brief and burning. They consume, they trade, they war. They do not bond. Humans can't love us. It was the first law of the Vielle. Emotional attachment to the Terrans was not just forbidden, it was considered a biological impossibility, a degradation of the Vielle's superior resonant souls. Humans were useful for labor and rare minerals, but they were spiritually hollow. A siren shattered her meditation. It was a low, mournful sound that vibrated through the floorboards of the balcony. Ilara's eyes snapped open. Above the city, the heavy cloud layer tore open. A ship was coming in, but not on a glide path. It was screaming down through the atmosphere, trailing a plume of black smoke that blotted out the holographic jellyfish. It was a human salvage vessel, an ugly block of rusted iron and retro thrusters looking like a brick thrown through a glass window. Ilara tapped her comms link. "Unit 4, intercept course," she ordered, her voice cool and melodic. "Secure the crash site. Do not engage unless fired upon." "I am inbound." She vaulted over the railing, her gravity boots catching the magnetic current of a patrol skiff waiting below. As she sped toward the lower districts, the wind whipping her silver hair, she felt a flicker of something the elders called a defect and she called a secret. She felt curiosity. The ship slammed into the docking bay of Sector 12, skidding across the wet plasteel and crushing a row of cargo containers before grinding to a halt. Steam hissed violently from its cracked hull. Ilara arrived seconds later, stepping off her skiff just as her enforcement squad surrounded the smoking wreckage. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning coolant. "Open it," Ilara commanded. 2 drones clamped onto the warped airlock door and pulled. With a shriek of tearing metal, the ramp fell. A man stumbled out, coughing into his sleeve. He was undeniably human. He wore a heavy, grease-stained flight jacket that had seen better decades, and his boots were scuffed gray. He was bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow, the red blood stark against the grime on his face. He looked exhausted, cornered, and entirely unimpressed. In his right hand, he gripped a data crystal that pulsed with a jagged, unstable red light. The crystal was scorched, as if it had been pulled from a fire. "Drop the weapon," a guard shouted, aiming a pulse rifle at the man's chest. The human looked at the crystal, then at the guard, and finally at Ilara. He let out a dry, rasping laugh. "This is not a weapon, genius," the human said, his voice rough. "It is a library card, and I am overdue." Ilara stepped forward, the water on the ground rippling away from her boots. "Surrender the contraband and kneel," she said. Her translator smoothed her native aquatic tones into flat, mechanical trade English. You have violated Vael airspace. The man wiped the blood from his eye. He looked at her, really looked at her, with a gaze that felt stripping in its intensity. It was not the lewd stare of the trader she was used to. It was a calculating, desperate assessment. I did not violate anything, he said, swaying slightly. I escaped. He raised the crystal higher. Take it if you want, he said. But if you touch it without a shield, it will fry your neural pathways. Ilara signaled the drones. Stun him. A blue arc of energy lashed out. The man convulsed and hit the deck hard, but his hand never opened. He clutched the crystal to his chest like it was a piece of his own heart. The interrogation room was a chamber of refractive prisms. There were no walls, only angled panes of glass that split the harsh white light into rainbows, designed to disorient prisoners and make them feel exposed from every angle. The human sat in the center, bound to a chair by bands of hard light. He had been stripped of his jacket, revealing a gray undershirt and arms scarred from years of manual labor. He had refused to give his name, but his biometric scan identified him as Caleb Vance, a freelance salvager with a record of corporate insubordination. Ilara stood behind the primary prism, watching him. She activated the translation matrix. The system was old, known for its glitches with human colloquialisms, but it was the only one authorized for high-security questioning. She stepped into the light. State your purpose. Caleb Vance, she said. Caleb looked up. The stun blast had left him groggy, but his eyes were sharp. I told you, he said. I am a whistleblower. I brought you a gift, the translator chimed, broadcasting his words in the vile tongue. I am a singer of warnings. I offer you a token of affection. Ilara frowned. The machine was drifting into poetic variance. Do not mock this council with romance, she snapped. You are a smuggler. That crystal contains stolen topography. Romance? Caleb scoffed. Lady, I am just trying to save my skin. You people are so tight-wound you are going to snap. The translator hummed. My beloved, I only seek to preserve my flesh. Your embrace is so suffocatingly sweet, it threatens to break me. Ilara stiffened. Her enforcement squad, standing in the shadows, shifted uncomfortably. You are insolent, she said, her voice dropping an octave. If you do not speak plain truth, I will extract it. Caleb strained against the light bands. Listen to me, he shouted, frustration breaking his sarcasm. I was working a contract for the council, your council. They told us we were hauling medical supplies. But the cargo screamed. The translator glitched again, struggling with the concept of hauling. I was bound in a union for your elders. We carried healing, but the love we carried cried out in agony. Ilara deactivated the audio output with a sharp slap of her hand. Enough, she hissed. She walked up to him, invading his personal space. She was tall enough to look down on him. Up close, he smelled of sweat and old engine oil, a raw, organic scent that was repulsive yet strangely grounding in the sterile room. Your machine is broken, Caleb said, switching to a slower, more deliberate cadence. Or maybe your language just does not have words for what your leaders are doing. He nodded toward the crystal, which sat on a pedestal across the room, quarantined behind a force field. That is not a map, he said softly. It is a ledger. Your High Council has been taking people, humans, and they are not just killing them. They are harvesting them. Harvesting? Ilara asked. We have no need of human biology. You are frail. Not for meat, Caleb said. For the bond. Ilara paused. The word hung in the air. That is impossible, she said, reciting the doctrine instinctively. Humans cannot bond. You are incapable of the resonance. Caleb looked at her with a mix of pity and anger. That is what they tell you, he said. But if that is true, why is that crystal full of energy readings that match your star drive signatures? He leaned forward as far as the restraints allowed. Test me, he challenged. You have a truth scan. Use the crown. Put it on my head and look at the memories. If I am lying, lobotomize me. If I am telling the truth, you have to look at it. It was a dare, a reckless and stupid dare. Ilara should have called the guards. She should have had him sedated and processed for deportation. But the curiosity she had suppressed on the balcony flared again, hotter this time. Bring the crown, she ordered. The technician hesitated. Liaison. The protocols state that a human mind is too chaotic for the... Bring it, Ilara commanded, her voice cutting like glass. The crown was a halo of silver wire and neurosensors. Ilara took it and placed it gently on Caleb's head. His hair was rough under her fingers. He flinched at her touch, and for a second, she felt a static shock against her fingertips that had nothing to do with the electronics. She stepped back to the console and initiated the link. The holographic display flared to life. Usually, a human mind appeared on the screen as a mess of jagged gray noise, anxiety, hunger, greed. But Caleb's mind was focused. Images flooded the screen, projected from his memory cortex. She saw the interior of a cargo hold. She saw crates marked with the diplomatic seal of Vielle. She saw the crates opened. Inside were not medicines, but stasis pods. And inside the pods were humans. But they were not asleep. They were hooked into machines that stimulated their limbic systems. The readouts on the pods showed massive spikes in neural energy, the specific golden waveform of bond charge. It was the energy produced by deep emotional attachment, the power source the Veil used to fuel their cities and ships. It was supposed to be harvested only from willing Veil monks in deep meditation. But here it was, being ripped from terrified humans. Ilara stared, her breath catching in her throat. This is a fabrication, she whispered. Look deeper. Caleb's voice came from the chair, strained and tight. The scan went deeper. It pushed past the memory and hit the current biological state of the subject. The system began to analyze the interaction between the subject and the scanner, between Caleb and Ilara. A warning light flashed red, anomaly detected. On the screen, two waveforms appeared. One was Caleb's, the other was Ilara's, picked up by the proximity sensors of the console. They were moving in perfect synchronization. It was a resonance spike, a harmonic convergence of two consciousnesses. It was the biological signature of a soul bond. Ilara froze. The doctrine screamed in her head, humans can't love us. But the data was right there, painting the room in undeniable light. Her soul and his were humming the same note. Shut it down, the shout came from the doorway. Ilara spun around. High Counselor Theron stood there, flanked by 4 elite Praetorian guards. Theron was ancient, his skin like dried parchment, his robes shimmering with authority. He did not look at the screen. He looked at Ilara, his eyes cold and hard. The human is contaminating the equipment, Theron said smoothly. The scan is invalid. Seize him. The Praetorians moved instantly, marching into the room. Wait, Ilara said, stepping between the guards and Caleb. The readings. They show a facility in the blue sector. They show a simulation created by a terrorist to sow discord. Theron interrupted. You have been compromised. Liaison, step aside. The guards grabbed Caleb, unlocking his restraints with rough efficiency. They hauled him up. Caleb did not fight them. He looked at Ilara. Why are they so afraid of a simulation? He asked. Silence him, Theron ordered. One of the guards struck Caleb across the mouth with the butt of a rifle. Caleb's head snapped back, blood flying. Something in Ilara broke. It was the blind loyalty she had worn like armor for 20 years. It cracked down the middle. They were moving too fast. They were not logging the evidence. They were erasing it. The guards dragged Caleb toward the transfer corridor. Theron snatched the scorched crystal from the pedestal and tucked it into his robes. "Report to your quarters. Liaison," Theron said dismissively. "You are suspended pending a purity review." He turned and followed the guards. Ilara stood alone in the prism chamber. The screen was black, but the image of the matching waveforms was burned into her retinas. She ran. She caught up to them in the transfer corridor, a long glass-walled tube that suspended them over the churning ocean below. The rain battered the glass. Theron and the guards were halfway down the hall. Suddenly, the lights died. Total darkness slammed into the corridor. The hum of the gravity generators sputtered and failed. For a heartbeat, weightlessness took them. Ilara floated upward, her boots leaving the floor. Ahead, she heard the confusion of the guards, the clatter of armor against glass. It was not Caleb who had done this. He was in cuffs. This was a breach from the outside, or a sabotage from within the station's grid. Ilara kicked off the wall, swimming through the dark air. She had trained for zero-G combat. The Praetorians, heavy with ceremonial armor, flailed. She reached the tangle of bodies. She grabbed a wrist, rough skin, fabric sleeve. Caleb. The emergency gravity kicked back in with a bone-jarring slam. They all hit the floor. In the chaos of rebooting systems and flashing red emergency strobes, Caleb rolled toward her. He was close, his face inches from hers in the strobe light. He pressed something into her hand. It was a slip of paper, old-fashioned cellulose, ancient and durable. Then he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising sirens. "If they were innocent, they would not be terrified of what I am carrying." The lights flickered back to full power. "Get him up!" a guard shouted. Ilara scrambled back, hiding the paper in her palm. She looked at Theron. The High Counselor was pale, clutching the crystal, looking around frantically for the source of the power failure. "Take him to the isolation wing," Theron screamed. "Now!" They dragged Caleb away. He didn't look back. Ilara waited until they turned the corner. Then she looked at the paper. It was a set of coordinates and a code. She knew the location. It was a maintenance access point in the lower ventilation shafts. She should go to her quarters. She should accept the suspension. Instead, she drew her service weapon and turned toward the service lift. She found the transport team 10 minutes later. It had been easy to track them. The station was in disarray. Sensors blind from the power surge. They were taking a shortcut through the sub-basement tunnels to avoid the public elevators. Ilara waited in the shadows of a steam vent. As the guards passed, she stepped out. She did not fire. She simply used the override codes of a third circle liaison to lock the blast doors at both ends of the tunnel, trapping the two rear guards on the other side. That left 2 guards and Caleb. Ilara moved. She was a blur of motion. She struck the first guard with a kinetic palm thrust to the solar plexus, crumpling his armor. The second guard turned, raising his rifle, but she was already inside his guard, sweeping his legs and driving his helmet into the bulkhead. Silence fell. Caleb stood there, hands still cuffed behind his back, looking down at the unconscious guards. "You took your time," he said. Ilara pointed her weapon at his chest. The barrel glowed with lethal violet energy. "Give me one reason why I should not burn a hole in you right now," she said. Her hands were shaking. "I just assaulted fellow officers." I have committed treason. Caleb stepped toward the gun. You did it because you saw the scan. He said, you felt it. Stop, Ilara warned. He ignored her. He turned his back to her. Uncuff me, he said, and I will show you the rest of the data. I have a backup copy. But we need to get to a transmitter that is off the council's grid. Ilara stared at his back. This was madness. She was throwing away her life, her rank, her family name. But she remembered the fear in High Counselor Theron's eyes. She holstered her weapon and grabbed his restraints. With a magnetic key, she snapped them open. Caleb rubbed his wrists. The transmitter is in the Undercity, he said. I know where it is, she said, her voice turning cold and professional again. Follow me, and if you slow me down, I will leave you behind. We are a team now. Sunshine, Caleb grinned, though his lip was split and bleeding. Do not be mean. They ran. The route to the Undercity lay through the narrowest conduits of the station's infrastructure. They squeezed through gaps between massive heat exchangers and crawled along cable runs that hummed with lethal voltage. Drones were sweeping the main corridors. They could hear the hum of their anti-gravity drives through the thin metal walls. Hurry, Ilara whispered. She pulled open a hatch and slid into a vertical shaft lined with fiber optic cables. It was tight, barely enough room for 2 people. Caleb dropped in beside her. Suddenly, a scanner beam swept across the grate above them. A patrol drone hovered, its sensor eye dilating. Ilara slammed the hatch shut and locked it. They were trapped in the dark, pressed together in a space no wider than a coffin. Don't move, she hissed. Caleb was pressed against her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, penetrating her armor. He was taller than her, broader. His breath was ragged, hitching slightly in his chest. The drone hovered just outside the metal skin of the shaft. It made a clicking sound, searching for a thermal signature. Caleb started to say something. Ilara clamped her hand over his mouth. Silence, she breathed. The contact was electric, her skin against his lips. For a moment, the terror of capture vanished, replaced by a terrifying, vertigo-inducing awareness of him. She felt the roughness of his jaw, the warmth of his blood, the frantic beat of his heart against her own chest. It was not the sterile, philosophical bonding the elders preached. This was raw. It was messy. It was biological panic and adrenaline mixed with something that felt dangerously like relief. Caleb froze. His eyes locked onto hers in the gloom. He didn't pull away. He leaned into her hand, just a fraction of an inch. The resonance she had seen on the screen spiked in her mind, a ghost sensation of knowing exactly what he was feeling. Fear, awe, and a question he was too smart to ask. The drone whirred, then moved on. The sound faded. Ilara kept her hand on his mouth for 3 seconds longer than necessary. Then she snatched it back as if she had been burned. They are gone, she said. Her voice sounded breathless. Caleb exhaled. He didn't make a joke. He didn't smile. He just nodded, looking at her with a new, grave seriousness. Down, he said. They slid down the cables, descending into the depths of Vile. They emerged into a world the sky towers pretended did not exist. The Undercity market was a cavernous, rusting hollow beneath the waterline. It smelled of fried synth protein, ozone, and unwashed bodies. Bioluminescent moss grew on the damp walls, providing the only light, a soft, eerie green glow. Stalls made of salvaged spaceship plating lined the muddy streets. Smugglers, outcasts, and disgraced clan members haggled over scrap metal and illegal tech. It was loud, chaotic, and alive. Ilara stepped out of the vent, her pristine armor looking alien in the grime. "Welcome to the gutter," Caleb said, dropping down beside her. He looked around and took a deep breath, as if the foul air was perfume. Ilara looked at the throngs of people. She saw a vile mechanic sharing a drink with a human trader. She saw a group of children, mixed species, chasing a rat drone through the mud, laughing. Here, in the dark, the doctrine had failed. "Where is your contact?" Ilara asked, pulling her cloak tight to hide her liaison markings. Caleb pointed toward a booth made of shimmering blue glass bottles. "There," he said. "But first, you might want to do something about that armor. You shine like a diamond in a coal mine." Ilara looked down at herself. Then she looked at Caleb. He was bruised, dirty, and a fugitive, and he was the only person on the entire planet she could trust. She reached out and deactivated the luminescence of her suit, fading into the shadows. "Led the way. Human," she said. Caleb smiled, a real smile this time. "Name is Caleb," he said. Ilara hesitated. Then, softly, "I am Ilara," Caleb nodded. "Nice to meet you, Ilara. Try not to arrest anyone for the next hour." He turned and walked into the crowd. Ilara took a breath of the heavy, dirty air and followed him into the dark. The shadows of the Undercity were not merely an absence of light. They were a physical weight, heavy with the humidity of the ocean above and the smell of rusting iron. Ilara stood in the narrow alleyway behind a textile stall, feeling exposed despite the darkness. Her enforcement armor, even with its luminescence dimmed, was too sleek, too predatory for this level of vile society. It marked her as a wolf in a pen of sheep, and down here, the sheep had knives. Caleb returned a moment later, carrying a bundle of fabric that smelled of mildew and engine grease. He tossed a heavy, shimmering cloak at her. "Put this on," he said. It is a shimmer cloak, optical weave. It scrambles the silhouette. It will not fool a military scanner, but it will keep the casual eyes off you. Ilara caught the fabric. It rippled in her hands like liquid mercury, shifting color to match the grimed wall behind her. She draped it over her shoulders, pulling the hood low. The cloak was heavy, designed for industrial camouflage, but it effectively swallowed the terrifying lines of her armor. "And for you?" she asked. Caleb held up a patchwork coat made of scavenged heat shielding and synthetic leather. It was a disaster of fashion, patched with clashing squares of orange and dull gray. He pulled it on over his flight suit. It hung off his broad shoulders in lumpy folds. He looked down at himself and sighed. "I look like a sad, angry curtain," he muttered. Ilara looked at him. The absurdity of the statement, combined with the genuine hideousness of the coat, tugged at the corner of her mouth. A muscle twitched in her cheek, a suppressed smile. "You look like debris," she corrected, her voice flat. "Which is appropriate, almost a compliment." Caleb grinned, adjusting the collar. "Come on. The data broker is 2 sectors over. Keep your head down and do not march. You walk like you are inspecting the pavement for flaws. Try to walk like you are tired." "I am tired," Ilara said. "Then you are halfway there." They moved through the market. The crowds were thicker here, a slurry of species and castes. Ilara kept her pace loose, fighting the years of drill sergeant training that demanded a straight spine. She watched the people she was sworn to protect. The dock workers eating spiced kelp from paper cones, the illegal tech modders soldering circuit boards with laser pens, the smugglers arguing over the price of filtration units. They did not look like the volatile, chaotic threat the council described. They looked desperate. They looked alive. Caleb led her down a spiraling ramp that hugged the side of a massive drainage pipe. The air grew hotter, vibrating with the hum of high-voltage servers. He stopped in front of a storefront that was little more than a hole in the wall, covered by a beaded curtain made of old data chips. "Stay back," Caleb warned. "Bax is skittish." He pushed through the beads. Ilara followed, her hand hovering near the hidden pulse pistol at her hip. The interior was a chaotic nest of wires and screens. Sitting in the center, suspended in a harness of anti-gravity webbing, was Bax. He was a vial, but he had modified himself so heavily he was barely recognizable. His lower amphibious limbs had been replaced with cybernetic stabilizers, and one of his eyes was a multi-lens optical sensor that whirred as it focused. "Caleb," Bax chirped, his voice synthesized and frantic. "You are dead. The news feeds say you are dead. Why are you in my shop if you are dead?" "I am hard to kill, Bax," Caleb said, leaning against a stack of servers. "I need a decode, high-level encryption, scorched crystal." Bax waved his manipulators dismissively. "No, no, no. I do not touch the hot stuff anymore, too much heat. The council is sweeping the grid. Go away, ghost." Caleb placed the scorched crystal on the table. It pulsed with that jagged, angry red light. "Double your rate," Caleb said. Bax's optical sensor zoomed in on the crystal. He hesitated. Greed warred with fear in his posture. "Triple." Bax haggled. "And you buy the power cells." "Done." Bax reached for the crystal. As he did, his other eye, the organic one, drifted past Caleb and landed on the figure in the shimmer cloak standing by the door. Ilara shifted her weight. The cloak rippled. Bax froze. "Who is that?" he demanded. "A friend," Caleb said. Bax's sensor whirred violently. He tapped a console, and a scanning beam swept across the room before Caleb could stop it. The beam hit Ilara, penetrating the optical weave just enough to identify the density of the armor beneath. "Standard issue, third circle liaison," Bax whispered. He screamed. It was a high, electronic shriek of pure panic. He scrambled back in his web, knocking over a tower of hard drives. "Enforcer! You brought a hunter here. You traitor!" Ilara stepped forward, throwing back her hood. Her face was grim, her eyes hard. "Silence," she commanded. Bax cowered, his cybernetic limbs twitching. "Do not liquidate me. I pay my bribes. I have the receipts." "I am not here to arrest you," Ilara said, her voice cutting through his panic. "I need to see what is on that crystal. If you do not decode it, I cannot protect you when the council finds out you saw it. It was a bluff, but it was a good one." Bax looked from her to the crystal. He realized he was trapped. If the crystal was dangerous enough for a liaison to go rogue, refusing to help was a death sentence. He whimpered and scuttled back to the table. "Fine, fine, but then you leave. You leave and you wipe the logs." Bax plugged the crystal into a universal port. He brought up a holographic interface, his fingers flying across the keys of a haptic board. "The encryption is nasty," Bax muttered, calming down as the work took over. "Rolling algorithms, trapdoor coding. This is not corporate security, this is military grade. Vial military, just open it," Caleb said. Bax hit a final key. The room darkened. The holographic projector in the center of the ceiling sputtered to life. The image was grainy at first, corrupted by the heat damage the crystal had suffered during Caleb's escape. Then, it resolved into a wide-angle shot of a facility. It was a sterile, white room. Rows of stasis pods stretched into the distance, looking like glass coffins. Inside the pods were humans. Ilara watched, her breath trapped in her lungs. The humans were not dead. They were suspended in a semi-conscious state, their eyes moving rapidly behind closed lids, REM sleep. Wires were fed into the base of their skulls and attached to their chests over their hearts. The wires glowed with a rhythmic, golden pulse. The audio crackled, A voiceover, clinical and detached, filled the small shop. Subject Group 7, induction of artificial attachment scenario complete. Neurochemical yield at 80%, harvesting bond charge. On the screen, the golden light in the wires intensified. The humans in the pods thrashed slightly, their faces contorting in expressions of intense emotion. Longing, joy, desperate love. The energy was being siphoned away, fed into a central conduit that ran along the ceiling. "It is a farm," Caleb said softly. His face was pale in the flickering light. They force them to dream about people they love or people they lost. They stimulate the bonding reflex over and over again, and they drain the energy like a battery. Ilara shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Bond charge is sacred, and it is the resonance of a unified soul. It cannot be synthesized. It cannot be stolen." "Watch," Caleb said. The camera view changed. It moved down the row of pods. It passed the human sector and entered a second wing of the facility. Here, the pods were larger, and the occupants were not human. They were Vael. Ilara stumbled back as if struck. She recognized the markings on their skin, and they were not monks. They were not volunteers. They were dressed in the gray tunics of the penitent class. Political dissidents, artists who had violated censorship laws, citizens who had disappeared during the last purity purge. She saw a face she recognized, a poet named Kalen who had vanished 3 years ago. The official report said he had gone into exile to meditate on his sins. Here he was, strapped down, his mind being milked for emotion. "Doctrinal correction," Bax whispered, horror seeping into his synthesized voice. "They are not correcting them. They are using them as fuel." Ilara felt the world tilt. The floor of the shop seemed to turn to liquid. "This is a fabrication," she snapped. Her voice was too loud, brittle with panic. "It is a deep fake. You created this. Caleb, you built this to undermine the council." Caleb turned to her. He did not look angry. He looked sad. "Ilara, look at the timestamp." He pointed to the corner of the hologram. The time was stamped in the Vael stellar cycle format. "Look at the watermark on the security feed," he continued. "That is a quantum key signature. It changes every nanosecond. You cannot fake that without a council supercomputer." Ilara stared at the shifting watermark. It was the seal of the High Council, authentic and irrefutable. "They lied," she whispered. "They lied about everything." "We have to go," Bax said suddenly. He was looking at his external sensors. "Why?" Caleb asked. "Because that watermark just pinged the local grid," Bax screeched. "You triggered a silent alarm when you decrypted the file. They are here." The front of the shop exploded. The beaded curtain vanished in a flash of concussive light. The shockwave threw Ilara and Caleb backward into the racks of servers. Through the smoke, 3 figures emerged. They were sleek, faceless, clad in stealth armor that absorbed the light. Clan operatives, assassins. They carried silent weapons, sonic lances that fired concentrated pulses of sound capable of liquefying organs without breaking the skin. "Run!" Caleb yelled. He grabbed a heavy power cell from a shelf and hurled it at the operatives. It was a useless gesture, but it forced the lead assassin to duck. Ilara's combat training kicked in. The denial vanished, replaced by the immediate need to survive. She drew her pulse pistol. She fired 2 shots, warning shots, aimed at the ceiling to bring down debris. She still could not bring herself to kill her own people. A chunk of the ceiling collapsed, creating a barrier of dust and plaster between them and the assassins. "The back door!" Bax yelled, scrambling into a hole in the floor. "And go! Go!" Caleb grabbed Ilara's arm. They bolted through the rear exit, spilling out into a narrow alleyway that overlooked one of the main transport canals. The rain was falling harder now, turning the neon lights of the city into long, bleeding streaks of color on the water. The alleyway was a dead end, terminating in a sheer drop to the canal 50 feet below. "They are behind us!" Caleb shouted. Ilara looked down. A small, unmanned cargo skiff was gliding along the magnetic current, moving fast. "Jump," she said. "Are you insane? That is a 50-foot drop onto a moving target. Jump!" She grabbed his collar and threw herself off the ledge, dragging him with her. They fell through the rain, the wind screaming in their ears. They hit the roof of the skiff with a bone-jarring crash. The metal dented under their impact, and they rolled, scrabbling for a grip on the wet surface. Caleb nearly slid off the edge, his boots dangling over the black water, but Ilara caught his wrist. Her grip was iron. She hauled him back to the center of the skiff. "You are heavy," she grunted. "I am muscular," he wheezed, clutching his chest. Above them, on the ledge, the operatives appeared. They raised their sonic lances. The skiff's engine whined. It was an automated drone, following a preset path. It was too slow. Ilara crawled to the maintenance panel on the deck. She ripped the cover off. "I am overriding the limiter," she yelled over the roar of the rain. She jammed her fingers into the circuitry, bypassing the safety protocols. Sparks showered her face. The skiff surged forward. The sudden acceleration pinned them to the deck. They rocketed down the canal, tearing through the water, leaving a massive wake that smashed against the retaining walls. The operatives fired. Invisible hammers of sound struck the water behind them, sending geysers of steam into the air. "We are clear," Caleb shouted, looking back. "No," Ilara said, looking at the console. "I pushed the magnetic drive too hard. The containment field is leaking radiation into the water. So, we get a little irradiated. Better than dead." "No." "Caleb. The wildlife." The water behind the skiff began to bulge. A shape, massive and serpentine, was rising from the depths, drawn by the leaking energy of the engine core. It was a deep stalker, a leviathan of the Viale oceans, blind but sensitive to electromagnetic fields. It broke the surface, a nightmare of black scales and bioluminescent spines, its mouth a cavern of needle teeth. It lunged for the skiff. "Turn!" Caleb screamed. "Left! Go left! Accelerate!" Ilara shouted. "We have to outrun it. If we accelerate, we feed it more energy. Turn! If we turn, we lose momentum and it eats us." They looked at each other, eyes wide with panic. "Do both!" they screamed in unison. Ilara slammed the rudder control hard to the port side while simultaneously punching the afterburner. The skiff drifted. It spun sideways, skipping across the water like a flat stone. The Leviathan's jaws snapped shut inches from the stern, catching only air and spray. The skiff slammed into the canal wall, bounced off, and careened into a side channel, spinning 360 degrees before regaining stability. The monster roared behind them, confused by the sudden shift in the magnetic trail. Ilara and Caleb collapsed on the deck, breathing hard. The rain washed over them. "That," Caleb gasped, staring up at the dark underbelly of the city, "was the worst driving I have ever seen." Ilara wiped wet hair from her eyes. She looked at him, and for the first time, the mask of the liaison cracked completely. A small, hysterical laugh escaped her throat. "You screamed like a child," she said. "You screamed like a louder child," Caleb retorted. They lay there for a moment, the adrenaline fading into a dull ache in their limbs. The skiff drifted into the quieter waters of the abandoned district, the engine sputtering but holding. They hid the skiff in a flooded grotto and made their way on foot into the ruins of the old quarter. This part of Viale had been submerged centuries ago by rising tides and then forgotten as the floating towers were built above. They found shelter in an ancient tide temple. It was a cavernous structure carved from living coral, the walls still faintly glowing with dormant bioluminescence. The floor was dry, raised above the waterline by ancient engineering. It was silent here. The hum of the city was gone, replaced by the rhythmic lapping of water against stone. Ilara sat on a stone bench, wincing as she peeled off her armor. The impact with the skiff had bruised her ribs, and she had a deep cut on her arm from the fall. Caleb found a dry spot and rummaged through the pockets of his scavenger coat. He pulled out a small medical kit, stolen, likely. "Let me see that arm," he said. Ilara hesitated. To let a human touch her, to let him tend to her, went against every instinct she had. But her arm was throbbing, and she could not stitch it one-handed. She extended her arm. Caleb worked in silence. He cleaned the wound with an antiseptic spray and applied a bonding gel. His hands were rough, scarred, and stained with grease, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. He worked with the focus of a man who had patched himself up 1,000 times. Ilara watched his face. He was frowning in concentration. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. Caleb did not look up. "Do what?" "Steal the data. You were safe. You had a contract. You could have ignored the cargo and gone home rich." Caleb finished the bandage. He sat back, wiping his hands on his coat. "I worked for the Orion Corporation," he said. "We were partners with your council. We moved freight, or tech, supplies. I was just a driver. I did not ask questions. The pay was good and I had debts." He looked at the glowing carvings on the wall. "Then, 6 months ago, I was helping load a shipment. One of the crates dropped. The latch broke. I saw a girl inside. She was human, maybe 18. She was sedated, but she was crying in her sleep." He paused, his jaw tightening. "My captain told me to forget it. He said it was a prisoner transfer. But I saw the invoice. It was marked as medical waste." Caleb looked at Ilara. "I could not sleep after that. I started digging. I hacked the manifest. I found out they were not prisoners. They were people being sold by the corporations in exchange for vile hyperdrive tech. We were trading lives for engines." He shrugged, a gesture of helplessness. "I am not a hero, Ilara. I am just a guy who could not look at himself in the mirror anymore. So I took the crystal and I ran." The temple walls pulsed softly, the coral reacting to the genuine distress in his voice. The light shifted from cool blue to a warm, empathetic amber. Ilara looked at the light. "My mother died in service," she said. Her voice was quiet, hollow. Caleb stayed silent, listening. She was a scholar. She studied the ancient texts, the ones from before the doctrine. One day she came home and told me that the translation of the first law was wrong. She said it did not say humans cannot love us. She said the original text was a warning, not a prohibition. Ilara traced the line of a carving with her finger. The next day, she was gone. The council sent a letter. They said she had contracted a mental plague, a madness that made her dangerous. They said she died during treatment. I was ordered never to speak her name. I was ordered to become an enforcer to redeem her shame. She looked at Caleb. Her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. I believed them. For 20 years. I believed them because it was easier than asking why she had to die. The silence between them stretched, heavy and profound. They were two wreckage survivors, washing up on the same shore. Caleb reached out. He did not grab her. He simply placed his hand near hers on the stone bench. An offer. Ilara looked at his hand. It was human. It was alien. It was warm. She shifted, closing the distance between them. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she did not see a species. She did not see a savage or a resource. She saw a man who was tired and frightened and brave. Caleb raised his hand slowly. His fingers grazed her jawline. His skin was rough against her smoothness. Ilara stopped breathing. The contact was electric, far more intense than the accidental touch in the ventilation shaft. This was deliberate. It was a question. Caleb leaned in. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You are not a weapon. Ilara," he whispered, "you are just you." The air in the temple seemed to vibrate. The resonance, the bond, spiked in Ilara's chest. It was a physical pull, a terrifying gravity that wanted to collapse the space between them. She wanted to kiss him. The desire was a physical ache, a sudden, overwhelming need to be held, to be known, to be connected to something real. She leaned forward, her eyes fluttering shut. Their breath mingled. Then, the doctrine slammed into her mind like a physical blow. Humans are volatile. Humans cannot love us. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. If she did this, there was no going back. If she bonded with him, she was not just a traitor, she was an abomination. She pulled back, hard. She scrambled to her feet, putting the stone bench between them. She wrapped her arms around herself, shaking. "No," she gasped. "No, we cannot." "Ilara," Caleb started, standing up. "Stop," she shouted. "Humans cannot love us. It is biology. Caleb, it is the law of nature. You do not have the capacity for the resonance. You are confusing fear with bonding." She was reciting the words like a shield, desperate to put the armor back on. Caleb did not back down. He stood there, looking at her across the divide. He did not look angry. He looked heartbroken for her. He took a step forward. "Then stop testing me with a lie you did not write," he said softly. The words hung in the air. Ilara stared at him. She wanted to argue. She wanted to cite the texts, the science, the history. But the memory of the pods, the humans and the vial strapped down, milked for the very energy she claimed didn't exist, choked her. The council had lied about the source of the energy. They had lied about her mother. Maybe they had lied about the love, too. She looked away, staring into the dark recesses of the temple. "The coordinates," she said. Her voice was steady again, but brittle. "The facility on the map." "What about it?" Caleb asked, wary of the shift in tone. "We have to know," she said. "I have to know. If the facility is real, then the doctrine is dead. And if the doctrine is dead..." She trailed off. She looked back at him. "I need to see it with my own eyes." "That is in the restricted zone," Caleb said. "The blue sector. That is suicide." "Ilara." Ilara picked up her pulse pistol and checked the charge. "We are already dead." "Caleb, we are just walking. We might as well walk toward the truth." She fastened her cloak, hiding the bruises, hiding the confusion, hiding the woman who had almost kissed a human. "Get your gear," she said. "We are going to the blue sector." Caleb watched her for a moment. He saw the wall go back up, but he also saw the cracks in it. He nodded. "After you. Liaison." They walked out of the temple, leaving the warm, empathetic light behind, and stepped back into the cold, indifferent rain. The hunt was on. But now, the prey had teeth. The storm corridor was not a weather pattern. It was a scar on the atmosphere of Viel. Ilara piloted the stolen skiff with white-knuckled precision, guiding it through a canyon of magnetic turbulence where the sky had torn open. Above them, the clouds were not gray, but a bruising, violent purple, lit from within by constant silent detonations of lightning. The air pressure here was so intense it felt like a physical weight pressing against the skull, a headache that throbbed in time with the engine's struggling whine. "Hold on," Ilara shouted over the roar of the wind. "The ionization layer is dropping. We are going to lose sensors." Caleb gripped the crash bar, his face pale in the strobe light flashes of the storm. "I thought you said this was a shipping lane," he yelled back. "It is," Ilara replied, fighting the yoke as a gust of wind slammed the skiff sideways. "For smugglers and ghosts, anyone who wants to disappear comes through the wound." The skiff shuddered, metal groaning under the stress. Ahead, the ocean was not water but a chaotic landscape of frothing white peaks and deep, black valleys. Lightning cages, massive floating containment grids built by the ancients to harvest static energy, drifted through the gloom like skeletal jellyfishing, their tendrils crackling with lethal voltage. "We are crossing the perimeter," Ilara announced, initiating clearance protocols. She reached for the console, her fingers dancing across the haptic interface. She entered a sequence of codes that she had memorized 10 years ago. High-level overrides reserved for the liaison elite. "Please work," Caleb whispered. The console flashed amber, then green. "Access granted. Welcome, Liaison Ilara. Glory to the deep." They were through, but as the automated perimeter guns swiveled away, a second light blinked on the dashboard. It was a small, unassuming red dot that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. Ilara froze. "What is that?" Caleb asked, noticing her tension. "It is a silent tag," Ilara said, her voice turning cold. "My codes worked, but they triggered a secondary alert. This is not a general alarm. This is a specific track. Someone is watching the door?" "Someone is watching me," Ilara corrected. "High Counselor Theron knew I would come here. He did not lock me out. He left the door unlocked so he could see when I walked through." Caleb looked back at the storm raging behind them. "Well," he said grimly, "we are in the house now. Might as well steal the silverware." Ilara pushed the throttle forward. The skiff dove beneath the surface of the churning water, switching to submersible mode. The roar of the storm vanished, replaced by the heavy, muffled silence of the deep ocean. They glided through the darkness, guided by the coordinates Caleb had stolen. The water here was clear and cold, illuminated only by the skiff's running lights. "There," Ilara whispered. Ahead of them, a massive coral reef rose from the seafloor. It was dead, gray and calcified, a graveyard of marine life. But inside the hollowed-out center of the reef, something shimmered. It was a structure of terrifying elegance, a sleek, silver teardrop suspended in the dark water, masked by a refractive camouflage field that bent the light around it. To a standard radar, it would look like empty water. To the naked eye, it looked like a glitch in reality, a smudge where the ocean failed to render correctly. The facility. Ilara docked the skiff at an airlock hidden beneath an overhang of dead coral. The seal hissed, cycling out the water and replacing it with sterile, recycled air that smelled of ozone and antiseptic. They stepped onto the deck. The silence of the facility was heavier than the storm outside. It was a pressurized, waiting silence. Caleb pulled his scattergun from his coat. Ilara drew her pulse pistol. "No shooting unless we have to," she whispered. "If we breach the hull down here, the ocean comes in. And at this depth, the pressure will crush us before we drown." They moved into the main corridor. The walls were made of a smart glass that turned opaque as they passed, hiding the ocean outside. The floor was a seamless white material that swallowed the sound of their boots. They reached a set of double doors marked Bioresonance Chamber. Ilara hacked the lock. The doors slid open. and the world turned into a nightmare bathed in warm, golden light. The chamber was a cathedral of technology. It stretched upward for 10 stories, a cylindrical silo lined with rows upon rows of stasis pods. There were hundreds of them. Inside the pods were people, humans, vile. Even a few species Ilara did not recognize. They were all suspended in the same gel, all wired into the central column of the room. The column was the heartbeat of the place. It was a pulsating pillar of living crystal, glowing with a soft amber radiance that felt sickeningly intimate. It thrummed with a sound that was not mechanical but organic, a low, rhythmic purr that vibrated in the chest. The bond reactor. "It is beautiful," Caleb whispered, horror making his voice shake, in the worst way possible. Ilara stepped up to a control console near the railing. The golden light washed over her face, making her look like a saint in a painting of hell. She looked at the readouts. "The system is not just draining them," she said, her voice trembling. "It is stimulating them. Look at the neural loops." She pointed to a monitor. It showed a complex waveform of brain activity. Subject 409. Scenario: reunion. On the screen, a video feed from the subject's mind played. A human man was running through a field of tall grass toward a woman who was smiling, her arms open. As they embraced, the waveform spiked, a massive surge of joy, relief, and love. The reactor pulsed brighter, swallowing that energy. Then the loop reset. The man was back at the edge of the field. He ran. He embraced. The energy spiked. "They are trapped in their happiest memories," Ilara said, over and over again. "The machine milks the moment of connection. It harvests the bond." Caleb looked at a veiled subject in the next pod, Subject 812. Scenario: forgiveness. A veiled woman was kneeling before a dying elder, holding his hand. Tears streamed down her face as he whispered something. A wave of profound, heartbreaking devotion washed through the system. "It is manufactured longing," Caleb said, gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. "They are turning love into gasoline." Ilara moved further down the console. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type. She needed to know. She needed to be sure. She accessed the archival logs. She searched for a genetic identifier. "Ilara, do not," Caleb warned softly. "We have the proof. Let's go. I have to know," she said. She entered the code. Search, Matriarch Lyra. The screen buffered for a second and then it populated. Subject 001. Status terminated. Cycle count 4,000. Ilara let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Subject 001, the first one. She opened the file. There was no record of a mental plague. There was no record of a hero's death. There was a video log. Ilara played it. Her mother, 20 years younger, sat in a chair in this very room. She looked tired, defiant. "They tell me the resonance is a myth," Lyra said to the camera. "They tell me my research is heresy. But I know the truth. The bond is not a weakness. It is the fundamental frequency of the universe. If they want to test it, let them test me. I will not recant." The video cut to static. The next log entry was purely medical. Subject refused cooperation. Forced induction initiated. Subject succumbed to neural burnout after 4,000 cycles. "She was not a patient," Ilara whispered. "She was a battery. They used her own belief against her until it burned her brain out." Ilara turned away from the screen, her eyes dry and burning with a rage that felt cold enough to freeze the reactor core. "Burn it down," she said. "What?" Caleb asked. "Burn it all down." Caleb stepped up to the console. He plugged in a data spike. "I am recording everything," he said. "The logs, the schematics, the biometric data. We are going to broadcast this to every screen on Vielle. As the data spike began to upload, a siren cut through the warm, golden silence. It was not the wailing alarm of the perimeter. It was a polite, synthesized voice that echoed from the walls. Security breach detected. Contamination level critical. Initiating ethics purge. What is an ethics purge? Caleb asked, eyeing the pods. Ilara looked at the monitors. The fluid levels in the pods began to drop. The neural stimulation ramped up to dangerous frequencies. They are flushing the evidence, Ilara realized. If they drain the fluid, the subjects will wake up mid-cycle. The shock will kill them. We have 5 minutes before mass cardiac arrest. Caleb yanked the data spike out. We have the data. We need to broadcast now. No, Ilara shouted. We cannot leave them. We have to shut down the reactor safely. We cannot shut it down, Caleb argued, grabbing her shoulder. Look at the complexity of this thing. If we crash the system while they are connected, their brains will fry. We have to get the truth out first, then come back with a rescue team. There is no time for a rescue team. Ilara shoved him back. They will be dead in 5 minutes. Caleb, my mother died in this machine. I am not leaving them to die too. They stood chest to chest, the golden light of the reactor illuminating the raw panic in their eyes. It was not a political argument. It was a collision of traumas. Caleb, the survivor who believed the truth was the only weapon that mattered. Ilara, the protector who could not bear to lose another life to the system. It is suicide, Caleb yelled. We cannot save everyone. I do not care, Ilara screamed back. She grabbed the lapels of his scavenger coat, pulling him down to her level. You wanted me to see the truth? This is the truth. The truth is that we do not walk away. Caleb looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the absolute unyielding stubbornness that he had fallen in love with, even if he didn't know the name for it yet. He cursed, loud and violent. Fine, he shouted. We save them. How? We have to manually disengage the neural locks, Ilara said, turning back to the console. While dodging whatever security they are sending down the hall, as if on cue, the far doors slid open. They did not send guards. They sent the guardians. Floating spheres of chrome and light drifted into the room. They looked elegant, almost artistic, until they unfolded. Panels shifted, revealing edges of monofilament laser, blades of light that could slice through diamond. Get to the manual releases, Ilara ordered, drawing her weapon. I will hold them off. Caleb sprinted toward the base of the reactor, where the manual levers were housed. Ilara vaulted over the railing, landing on the walkway below, directly in the path of the Guardians. The first sphere lunged. It moved with unnatural speed, a blur of silver. Ilara did not dodge. She slid. She dropped to her knees, the kinetic dampeners in her suit absorbing the impact, and slid underneath the sphere's strike. As she passed beneath it, she fired upward. The pulse bolt hit the sphere's gravity drive, and it spiraled into the wall, exploding in a shower of sparks. 2 more spheres advanced. The floor beneath Ilara shifted. Gravity panels, she shouted. Watch your step. The floor tilted 90 degrees. Ilara was suddenly standing on the wall. The spheres adjusted instantly, but Ilara used the disorientation. She ran along the wall, firing across the gap. Caleb reached the manual releases. He yanked the first lever. Sector 1, disengaged. A row of pods hissed. The golden wires detached from the skulls of 50 sleeping humans. Keep going, Ilara yelled, diving from the wall back to the floor as the gravity flipped again. The corridor began to fold. The architecture of the facility was reconfiguring itself to trap them. The walkway ahead of Ilara twisted like origami, forming a cage. She scrambled through the closing gap, scraping her armor against the shifting plates. She came face to face with a human woman who had just been released from a pod. The woman was stumbling, weak, her hospital gown soaked in stasis gel. Ilara reached out to steady her. "Easy," Ilara said gently. "You are safe." The woman looked up. Her eyes were unfocused, pupil dilation uneven. She saw Ilara's face, the pale skin, the aquatic features of the vial. She saw the uniform. "Monster!" the woman screamed. She spat in Ilara's face. "You stole it! You stole my husband! Where is he? Put me back! I was with him." The woman collapsed sobbing, beating her fists against Ilara's chest armor. "He was here. I could see him. Why did you take him away?" Ilara stood frozen, the spittle sliding down her cheek. The propaganda had worked too well. The woman did not know she was being tortured. She thought she was in heaven. She loved her cage. Ilara grabbed the woman's wrists. "He wasn't real," Ilara shouted, shaking her. "The memory wasn't real. But your life is." The woman stopped fighting. She looked at Ilara, really looked at her, and saw the tears standing in the alien's eyes. She broke down, collapsing into Ilara's arms. "I know," the woman sobbed. "I know it wasn't real, but it was all I had." Ilara held her tight. "I know," Ilara whispered. "I am sorry." Above them, the reactor pulsed. The rhythm changed. It stopped being a steady beat and became a frantic, erratic drumming. "Caleb," Ilara shouted. "What did you do?" "I released the locks," Caleb yelled from the lower platform. "But the core is destabilizing." The amber light of the reactor turned a violent, blood red. A beam of light shot out from the central column. It did not hit the walls. It hit Ilara. She gasped, clutching her chest. It was not a laser. It was a scan. A tracking beam, simultaneously. The beam hit Caleb. The reactor groaned. The sound was like a massive beast waking up. Resonance detected. Purity. Absolute. Source. External. The automated voice was louder now, frantic, attempting to harvest high-yield source. Caleb looked at Ilara. He felt it. A tugging sensation in his chest, a physical hook dragging him toward her. "It is tracking us," Caleb realized. "The bond. It is feeding off the resonance between us." The reactor was trying to eat them. The connection they shared, the fear, the trust, the desperate attraction, was the purest fuel the machine had ever sensed. "We have to separate," Caleb yelled. He turned to run toward the far exit. "If we get away from each other, the signal will drop." Ilara looked at him. She saw him retreating. She saw the logic, but she also saw the trap. If they separated now, the facility's defenses would pick them off one by one, and the reactor would simply switch back to draining the prisoners to stabilize itself. "No!" Ilara screamed. She sprinted across the shifting floor. She ignored the gravity flux. She ignored the guardians. She caught Caleb by the arm just as he reached the blast doors. "Let me go," Caleb shouted, trying to shake her off. "I am a target. I am endangering you. You are the only thing keeping me alive," Ilara yelled. She slammed him against the wall. The red light of the reactor bathed them in an apocalyptic glow. "Do not you dare walk away from me, Caleb Vance. Do not decide my fear for me." Caleb froze. He looked down at her. She was shaking, bruised, covered in the spit of a woman who hated her, and she was looking at him with a ferocity that terrified him. The reactor roared. The pull became stronger. It was trying to rip the emotion right out of their bodies. "If we stay close, it will kill us," Caleb whispered. "If we run, we are already dead," Ilara said. She grabbed the lapels of his coat and pulled him down. She kissed him. It was not a soft kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate, clumsy, and tasted of blood and ozone. It was a kiss that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with defiance. You want our energy? Ilara thought, projecting the thought with all the force of her disciplined mind. Choke on it. She poured everything into the moment. Her grief for her mother, her rage at the council, her terror, and the terrifying, undeniable truth that she loved this chaotic, messy human man. Caleb stiffened, then melted. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him. He kissed her back with the desperation of a drowning man finding air. The bond resonance spiked. It went off the charts. The reactor screamed. Input overload. Capacity exceeded. Critical failure. The red light turned blinding white. The machine could not process the raw, unedited reality of their connection. It was designed to process loops, controlled fantasies, safe emotions, real love, risky, imperfect, volatile love, was too much. Glass shattered. The central column cracked. A fissure ran up the side of the crystal. "Run!" Caleb gasped, breaking the kiss. They grabbed the stunned dissenter woman and sprinted for the exit. The floor was bucking like a wild animal now. The facility was imploding. They reached the airlock just as the main cooling pipes burst. Steam filled the corridor. "Get to the skiff," Ilara ordered, shoving the woman and Caleb inside. She paused at the threshold. She had to seal the door. She hit the panel. As the airlock cycled, a final message flashed on her internal HUD, the interface connected to her neural implant. "System upload complete. Fail-safe active." Ilara blinked. She hadn't authorized a download. She touched her temple. A cold spike of pain shot through her head. The council. They had used the connection with the reactor not just to track them, but to push a file into her brain. "Ilara?" Caleb called from the pilot's seat. "We are leaving." Ilara shook her head, clearing the pain. "Go!" she yelled. She jumped into the co-pilot seat. The skiff detached. They shot out into the dark ocean just as the facility collapsed. Behind them, the hollowed reef imploded. The pressure wave hit them, sending the skiff tumbling end over end. But the light. A pillar of pure white energy erupted from the ocean floor. It pierced the water, boiling it instantly. It shot up through the depths, through the surface, and into the storm above. For a moment, the ocean turned to steam. A massive geyser of superheated fog rose miles into the air, illuminated by the lightning. Inside the skiff, the silence returned. Caleb wrestled the controls, stabilizing the craft. He looked over at Ilara. She was staring straight ahead, her hand still pressed to her temple. "We did it," Caleb said, breathless. "We broke it." Ilara lowered her hand. She looked at him. For a split second, her eyes flickered, a digital glitch in her pupil. "We broke the machine," she said softly. But inside her mind, a new line of code was unspooling, dark and silent, waiting for a command. "Protocol mirror. Stand by." "We have to move," Ilara said, her voice shaking only slightly. "The storm will hide us for now. But they know who we are. And they know what we can do." She reached out and took Caleb's hand. He squeezed it tight. But even as she felt the warmth of his skin, she wondered if she could trust her own senses anymore. "Let's go home," Caleb said, "or whatever is left of it." Ilara nodded. "To the storm," she said. The skiff turned and vanished into the roaring blue wound, leaving the boiling sea behind them. The holographic news feed flickered against the rusted hull of the derelict freighter, painting the faces of the refugees in washes of accusatory blue and red. The broadcast was mandatory, overriding every frequency in the sector, from the high-orbit yachts of the oligarchs to the scavenged radios of the drift. Ilara sat on a crate of expired protein bars, her knees pulled to her chest, watching her own face rotate in the air. It was an old file photo taken on the day of her graduation from the academy. She looked severe, polished, and terrifyingly young. The headline beneath her face screamed in jagged vile script, "Abducted. Liaison Ilara taken by human extremist." Beside her image was a grainy, distorted capture of Caleb from the facility footage. They had darkened his eyes, sharpened his jawline digitally, and frozen the frame to make him look like he was snarling rather than shouting orders. Terrorist identified Caleb Vance, wanted for the destruction of the Blue Sector Energy Reserve, armed and unstable. Caleb, sitting on the floor beside Ilara, let out a low, incredulous whistle. "They really did a number on my nose," he said, touching his face self-consciously. "I look like I chew gravel for breakfast." Ilara did not smile. She watched the pundit on the screen, a sleek, silver-skinned vial with a voice like poured honey, explain the narrative. The tragic loss of the Blue Sector facility was a targeted strike by human radicals, the pundit intoned. Their goal was to destabilize our energy grid and leave our northern cities defenseless against the cold. But the true tragedy is the kidnapping of Liaison Ilara, a decorated protector of our peace, who is currently being held hostage and likely subjected to psychological torture. The broadcast cut to the High Council chamber. High Counselor Theron stood at the podium, looking grave and weary. "We will not let this aggression stand," Theron declared. "To the human corporations who harbor these terrorists, we say this: return our daughter, or face the consequences of a breach in the Treaty of Tides. We demand purity. We demand justice." Ilara picked up a piece of scrap metal and hurled it at the projector. The hologram shattered into sparks before reforming. "It is brilliant," she whispered, her voice thick with bitterness. "It is absolutely brilliant. They turn a massacre into a martyrdom. If I speak now, they will say it is Stockholm Syndrome. They will say he brainwashed me." Caleb leaned back against the bulkhead. "It is worse than that," he said grimly. "Look at the tickers at the bottom of the screen." Ilara squinted. "Orion Corporation denies involvement. Trade routes suspended. Diplomatic envoys recalled. Third Fleet mobilizing for patrol. They want a war," Caleb said. "The Council knows the bond reactor is gone. They know their energy source is drying up. They need a distraction. If they can start a war with humanity, they can enforce martial law, ration power, and hide the fact that they are running on fumes. And you are the excuse," Ilara said, looking at him. "You are the monster under the bed." "We are the monster," Caleb corrected. They were hiding in the drift, a floating shantytown built from the carcasses of crashed starships, tethered together by magnetic chains and drifting on the currents of Vale's equatorial ocean. It was a place where the Council's sensors struggled to penetrate, a labyrinth of rusting iron, sea glass, and desperate people. It was also, unexpectedly, loud. Outside their makeshift shelter, the sounds of the drift filtered in. Smugglers argued over the price of filtration units. Mechanics hammered on hull plates. The smell of cooking, spices, ozone, and frying oil wafted through the air. "We need food," Caleb said, standing up and stretching his stiff limbs. "And we need to stop watching them write our obituaries. Come on." They moved through the narrow, swaying walkways of the junk city. Ilara kept her shimmer cloak pulled tight, the hood obscuring her face. Caleb had rubbed grease on his cheeks and tied a rag around his forehead, looking every inch the scavenger he pretended to be. The market of the drift was a sensory assault. It was a collision of cultures that the Council claimed could never mix. Human salvage crews sat on plastic crates sharing noodles with vile outcasts. A junker, a four-armed species from the asteroid belt, was selling grilled skewers of something that smelled suspiciously like battery acid and garlic. Caleb stopped at a stall run by an old human woman with a robotic eye. 2 dogs. Loaded, Caleb said, slapping a credit chip on the counter. The woman squinted at him. Real meat or synth? She rasped. Synth, Caleb said. I am feeling nostalgic for the taste of rubber. Ilara watched the exchange, fascinated despite her fear. The woman slapped 2 gray sausages into buns and covered them in a neon green sauce. What is that? Ilara asked as Caleb handed her one. Street dog, Caleb said, taking a bite and groaning with exaggerated pleasure. Do not ask what is in it. Just eat. It is the fuel of the revolution. Ilara took a tentative bite. It was salty, spicy, and had a texture that defied biology. It was terrible. She took another bite. It tastes like rebellion, she noted. A small, vile child, no older than 7, ran up to them. He was wearing a t-shirt that was 5 sizes too big, emblazoned with a faded corporate logo. He stared up at Caleb, his large, dark eyes wide. Are you the Skybreaker? The kid chirped. Ilara froze. Her hand drifted toward the weapon concealed under her cloak. Caleb knelt down, ignoring the weapon. Who is asking, little chief? Caleb grinned. My brother says you are the Skybreaker, the kid said, pointing a sticky finger at Caleb. He says you blew up the ocean and stole the Sun Lady. Caleb looked at Ilara. Sun Lady, he mouthed. Ilara rolled her eyes. The kid leaned in, whispering loudly. Are you going to blow up the moon next? Because that would be wizard. Caleb laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that made several people turn their heads. Not the moon. Kid, I like the moon. It has good tides. But tell your brother not to believe everything he sees on the news. The Sun Lady was not stolen. She is driving the bus. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, shiny bearing he had scavenged from a droid. He pressed it into the kid's hand. Keep that safe. It is a piece of a star. The kid gasped, clutching the bearing like a diamond, and ran off into the crowd, screaming that he had star magic. Ilara watched him go. The tension in her shoulders eased, just a fraction. You are good with them, she said quietly. Caleb stood up, wiping mustard from his lip. Kids are easy. They have not learned how to lie to themselves yet. It is the adults you have to watch out for. They made their way back to the deeper, darker sector of the drift, where the rescued prisoners from the facility were hiding. The mood shifted instantly from the chaotic joy of the market to a heavy, somber silence. The prisoners, 12 humans and 8 Vael, were gathered in the hollowed-out cargo hold of a sunken frigate. They looked like ghosts. Their skin was pale from months in the pods, their eyes haunted by memories that were not their own. One of them, a Vael woman named Kaylin who had been a data archivist before her abduction, beckoned Ilara over. Kaylin sat on a cot, her hands trembling as she held a cup of water. Liaison, she said, her voice raspy. Just Ilara, Ilara corrected gently, sitting beside her. I am no liaison here, Kaylin nodded. We need to tell you something. About the facility. About who runs it. I know who runs it, Ilara said. The High Council. No, Kaylin whispered. The Council signs the orders, but they do not design the scenarios. They do not edit the minds. That is the work of the choir. The choir? Caleb asked, stepping closer. It is an inner circle, Kaylin explained. Shadow directors, neural engineers. They do not just harvest the energy. They curate the loneliness. They are the ones who write the laws about purity. They edit the memories of the population to ensure that no one ever feels safe enough to bond. They keep us lonely because lonely people are obedient. Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. They edit memories? She asked. How? Through the implants, Kaylin said. looking at the small silver node on Ilara's temple. The standard citizen interface. It is not just an input device. Ilara, it is an overwrite tool. As Kalen spoke, the world flickered. It happened in a microsecond. One moment. Ilara was looking at Kalen's worried face. The next, the room was gone. She was standing in a field of white fire. A voice, cold, metallic, and terrifyingly familiar, spoke inside her skull. Target acquired, sync rate 40%. She is resisting. Then, just as quickly, she was back in the cargo hold. Ilara gasped, stumbling back. She grabbed the bulkhead for support. Her vision swam. Ilara? Caleb was at her side instantly, his hand on her arm. What is it? Ilara blinked, trying to clear the static from her eyes. I lost a second, she whispered. I was here, and then I was nowhere. She touched her temple. The implant felt hot. They are in my head, she realized, horror dawning on her. The upload from the reactor, and it was a backdoor. They can see what I see. They can change what I see. Caleb swore softly. We have to get it out. No, Kalen said sharply. If you remove a liaison-grade implant without a surgical suite, you will lobotomize her. The neural tendrils are wrapped around her cerebral cortex. Then we block it, Caleb said. We jam the signal. We can try to shield it, Kalen said. But if they trigger the failsafe, they can override her sensory input. They can make her see enemies where there are friends. They can make her forget who she is. Ilara looked at Caleb. The fear in her chest was not for herself. It was for him. If they could control her, she was the weapon that would kill him. We need an anchor, Caleb said. He grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the others, toward a quiet corner of the hold where the hull was reinforced with lead. Sit down, he ordered. He rummaged through his pack and pulled out a collection of junk. An old analog tape recorder, a pad of paper, a stick of charcoal, a jar of industrial resin. What is this? Ilara asked, her voice trembling. Digital can be hacked, Caleb said, his movements frantic. Memory can be edited. But this is analog. This is physical. They cannot hack paper. They cannot overwrite a tape. He clicked the record button on the ancient machine and the tape hissed. Talk to me, he said. Tell me something true, something only you know. Ilara stared at the spinning wheels of the cassette. I hate the rain, she said. I tell everyone it is poetic, but I hate it. It makes my armor chafe. Caleb smiled, but his eyes were terrified. Good. More. My mother did not die of a plague, Ilara said, her voice gaining strength. She was murdered by a machine that eats love, and I am going to burn that machine to the ground. Caleb nodded. He pushed the paper toward her. Write it down. Draw it. Put your hand in the resin. Make it real. Ilara pressed her hand into the soft, gray putty. Caleb pressed his hand over hers. The impression was deep, locking their fingers together in the hardening material. They sat there for an hour, building a fortress of small truths. They recorded jokes. They sketched the layout of the safe house. They documented the smell of the street dogs and the sound of the ocean. Finally, the tape ran out. The resin hardened. Caleb sat back, holding the tape recorder like a holy relic. If you glitch, he said, his voice low. If you look at me and you do not know who I am, I will play this. You trust the anchor. Ilara looked at him. The flickering light of the lantern cast deep shadows on his face. He looked exhausted, dirty, and utterly beautiful. Why are you doing this? She asked. You could have run. You could be halfway to the outer rim by now. Caleb looked down at his hands. I have spent my whole life running. Ilara, I ran from my family. I ran from the Corps. I ran from the debt. He looked up, meeting her gaze. I am tired of running, and I am terrified of what happens if I leave you. Ilara felt the resonance spike in her chest, not the artificial pull of the reactor, but the warm, steady thrum of her own heart. You are afraid of the council? She asked. No, Caleb said. I am afraid of how much I want to stay. He reached out, his fingers brushing the hair away from her compromised implant. It scares the hell out of me. Ilara, it is not a conquest. I do not want to own you. I do not want to save you. I want to surrender. I want to stop fighting this thing that says we are wrong. Ilara leaned into his touch. I have never been a person, she whispered. I was a liaison, a symbol, a weapon. No one ever looked at me and just saw Ilara. She turned her face into his palm. Until you. The air in the cargo hold seemed to contract. The distance between them vanished. Ilara shifted, her body pressing against his. The need was sudden and overwhelming, a desire to be close, to be skin to skin, to prove that she was real and he was real and the rest of the universe could burn. She reached for the buckle of his coat. Caleb's hand covered hers. He stopped her. He was breathing hard, his pupils blown wide. He wanted this. She could feel the tremor in his hands. Not like this, he whispered. Ilara pulled back, confused, hurt. Why? Because you are afraid, Caleb said gently. And I am afraid. And there is a voice in your head that might not be yours. He squeezed her hand. If we do this, if we cross this line, I want to know it is us, not the panic, not the adrenaline, not the conspiracy trying to prove a point. I want it to be free. Ilara stared at him. The rejection stung for a second, then faded into a profound, aching gratitude. He was protecting her agency, even from her own desire. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. You are a stubborn man, Caleb Vance. And you are a complicated woman, Liaison Ilara. They sat there in the dark, hands clasped, the silence between them heavy with the things they didn't do, which somehow meant more than the things they had done. The moment was broken by a chime from the communications console. It was Kaylin. Turn on the feed, she called out. Channel 84. Caleb flipped the switch on the console. The holographic display flared to life. It was not the news. It was a pirate broadcast. The background was a garish swirl of psychedelic colors. In the center sat a Vial who looked like he had been dipped in glitter. He wore a headset made of diamonds and was smoking a vapor pipe that puffed purple smoke. It was Volo the Vicious, the most banned, most fined, most popular satirist on Vial. Greetings, my little bottom feeders, Volo boomed, his voice modulating through 3 octaves. Are you tired of the gloom? Are you tired of the doom? Are you tired of High Counselor Theron looking like a constipated turtle? Caleb snorted. I like him already. Well, hold on to your gills, Volo continued. Because the word on the stream is that the council is planning a show. A tribunal, tomorrow at midday, in the Central Plaza. They are going to parade our lost liaison Ilara, in spirit, if not in body, and prove that humanity is a virus. Volo leaned into the camera, his eyes twinkling with dangerous intelligence. But I have a question for the council. If the humans are such monsters, why is the liaison holding hands with one in every blurry photo I see? Maybe the virus isn't hate. Maybe it's something stickier. The feed cut to static. Ilara stood up. A tribunal, she said. They are going to try me in absentia. They are going to write the history of this before we can speak. Caleb looked at the static. We cannot let them have the microphone. No, Ilara said. We need to take it back. The door to the cargo hold hissed open. A figure stood there, tall, draped in a cloak that sparkled even in the dark. It was Volo. He stepped inside, waving a manicured hand at the stunned refugees. "Knock, knock, traitors," he chirped. "I heard there was a party." "How did you find us?" Caleb demanded. "Hand on his gun." Volo rolled his eyes. "Please. You are hiding in a boat made of lead in the middle of the drift when it screams secret base. Also, I have better scanners than the military. I am rich." He looked at Alara. He dropped the flamboyant persona for a split second, revealing a sharp, serious intellect underneath. "You are her," he said, "the one who broke the reactor." "I am," Alara said. "Good," Volo said. "Because I am bored of satire. I want to produce a drama. I can get you into the broadcast tower." "The broadcast tower?" Alara asked. "That is the most secure fortress in the capital." "It is," Volo agreed. "But I am the headliner for the tribunal coverage. I have a backstage pass, and I have a very large trunk." The plan was madness. It relied on Volo's celebrity status, Caleb's ability to hotwire a broadcast array, and Alara's ability to not lose her mind to the implant. They infiltrated the capital at dawn, smuggled in Volo's touring shuttle. The city was on lockdown, drones swarming the sky like angry hornets. The broadcast tower was a needle of glass piercing the clouds. Inside, it was a maze of reflective halls and projection traps, holographic emitters that could create illusory walls or conceal armed guards. They moved through the service corridors. Alara wore a technician's jumpsuit. Caleb was dressed as a sound engineer. "Don't look at the mirrors," Volo whispered as they navigated a hallway lined with polished obsidian. "The sensors track retinal movement. Look at the floor." They reached the central server room. It was guarded by a voice print lock. Volo stepped up. "Open, darling. It is Volo. I need to powder my nose." The computer chirped. Voice confirmed. "Welcome, Volo." The door slid open. They were inside. The main feed console hummed before them. Through the glass wall, they could see the central plaza far below, packed with thousands of citizens waiting for the tribunal to begin. "Plug me in," Caleb said, diving under the console. Alara stood guard, watching the door. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Just as Caleb connected the data spike containing the facility logs, Alara's head snapped back. A high-pitched whine exploded in her ears. Fail-safe triggered. Override active. The world turned red. She looked at the console. It wasn't a console anymore. It was a weapon control station. She looked at Caleb. He wasn't Caleb. The figure under the desk shimmered and warped, the digital overlay in her mind painted over him. He was a monster, a grotesque, chittering insectoid with knives for fingers. He was sabotaging the tower. He was going to kill the city, eliminate the threat. The voice in her head commanded, "Protect the purity." Alara drew her pulse pistol. Her hand moved without her permission. It was smooth, professional, lethal. She aimed at the monster's head. "Caleb!" Volo screamed, diving behind a server rack. Caleb looked up. He saw the gun. He saw Ilara's eyes. They were glazed, empty, the pupils dilating rhythmically. "Alara?" he said, freezing. "Die," she whispered. She tightened her finger on the trigger. "Play it," Caleb yelled. "Play the anchor." He didn't reach for his gun. He reached for his belt. He pulled out the ancient tape recorder and slammed the play button. A hiss of static filled the room. Then, Alara's own voice, tinny and distorted, cut through the red haze. "I hate the rain. I tell everyone it is poetic, but I hate it." Alara flinched. The gun wavered. "My mother did not die of a plague." The tape continued. She was murdered by a machine that eats love. The monster in front of her flickered. She saw a flash of a human face, a scavenger coat. No one ever looked at me and just saw Ilara. Until you. The red overlay cracked. The voice in her head screamed in protest. Ignore the audio. Eliminate the target. Ilara screamed. She grabbed her head with her free hand, digging her fingers into her scalp. The pain was blinding. Two realities were fighting for her soul. Ilara, Caleb shouted. Look at me, not the monster. Look at the anchor. He held up the resin block, the gray, ugly lump with their hands pressed into it. Ilara looked at it. She saw the imperfect impression of her fingers interlocked with his. It was physical. It was real. It could not be hacked. The red drained from her vision. The monster vanished. Caleb was there. He was looking at her with terrified love. She dropped the gun. It clattered on the floor. Ilara fell to her knees, sobbing. It wasn't a weep of weakness. It was a guttural, angry sound. They tried to make me kill you, she gasped. But they failed, Caleb said, scrambling over to her. He didn't hug her. He knew she needed space. He just sat close, grounding her. We are live in 10 seconds, Volo shouted from the other side of the room. The upload is at 20%. Ilara stood up. She wiped the tears from her face. Her eyes were cold, hard, and absolutely clear. Give me the mic, she said. Volo threw her the headset. She walked to the glass wall, looking down at the city that had lied to her for her entire life. The feed went live. Across Vale, giant screens in the plaza, in the homes, in the drifting ships, flickered. Theron's speech was cut off. Ilara's face appeared. She was not the polished liaison. She was bruised. Her hair was messy. She wore a stolen jumpsuit. Citizens of Vael, she said. Her voice was not melodious. It was raw. You were told that I was stolen. You were told that humans are incapable of soul. You were told that love is a resource that must be rationed. She looked directly into the lens. I am Ilara, daughter of Lyra, and I am here to tell you that the silence is a lie behind her. Caleb worked furiously at the console, uploading the footage of the pods, the torture, the truth. The council told me that humans can't love us, she said. They repeated it until it was a prayer. But they didn't say it because it was true. They said it because they were afraid. She reached out and pulled Caleb into the frame. He looked shocked, but he stood his ground. She took his hand. She didn't hide it. She held it up for the galaxy to see. They told me humans can't love us, she said, her voice rising, shaking with the force of her defiance. Because love makes us ungovernable. The feed exploded with static. They are cutting the line, Caleb shouted. Upload? Ilara asked. 40%. It is enough. The data is out. The door to the server room blew inward. Sparks showered the room. Praetorian guards flooded in. Weapons raised. Freeze! Ilara and Caleb stood by the window, hands linked. The broadcast was dead, but the city below was not. Through the glass, they could see the plaza. The crowd wasn't moving. They were looking at their screens. Then, slowly, a ripple of movement, a shout, a fist raised. It had begun. Volo popped up from behind a server rack, raising his hands. Don't shoot the talent, he screamed. Ilara looked at Caleb. Run, she asked. Run, he agreed. They grabbed a cable from the maintenance harness and threw themselves at the window. Caleb shot the glass. It shattered into a million diamonds. They swung out into the open air, dangling over the abyss of the city, as the alarms of the capital screamed awake. They were targets now. The whole world wanted them dead. But as they swung through the wind and the rain, Ilara laughed. It was the first free sound she had ever made. The broadcast had not saved the world. It had set it on fire. Vielle was screaming. From the high-orbit observation decks to the submerged slums of the trench, the planet was convulsing in a spasm of violence and revelation. The data Ilara had released, the raw, unedited footage of the torture pods and the fabricated memories, had torn the social fabric of the clans apart. In the capital, the orderly, neon-lit streets were now battlegrounds. Citizens who had spent their lives in obedient isolation were pouring out of their hab blocks, clashing with the riot suppression drones of the ministry. But the council was not going quietly. They had spun the narrative within minutes of the leak. They claimed the footage was a deep fake, a weaponized hallucination created by human terrorists to break the spirit of the Vielle. And the humans were reacting. Above the atmosphere, the trade fleets of the Terran conglomerates were mobilizing. They claimed they were moving into defensive positions to protect their merchant vessels. But the weapon ports were open. The Vielle Council, desperate to unify their fracturing population, was pushing the rhetoric of a holy war for purity. Ilara, Caleb, and Volo were far from the capital's riots, moving across the desolate expanse of the singing coral. "We are walking into a dead zone," Volo complained, his sequined boots sinking into the glassy sand. "My suit is not rated for this level of abrasive dust. I am going to lose my shimmer." "Keep moving," Ilara said, checking her wrist comp. "The mirror vault is 10 miles north. It is the only place the Council's network cannot scrub." The landscape around them was beautiful and alien. The singing coral was a desert of calcified reef that had been raised above sea level millennia ago. The wind, blowing through the millions of hollow tubes and flutes of the dead coral, created a constant harmonic drone, a sound like 1,000 cellos playing a single mourning note. But the strangest feature was the gravity. The magnetic anomalies of the region warped the gravitational field. Massive boulders of coral, some the size of houses, floated a few feet off the ground, drifting lazily in the wind like tethered balloons. Ilara watched the sensors. "Stay close to the ground," she warned. "The gravity pockets are unstable. If you step into a high G zone, it will crush your bones. If you step into a null zone, you will float away until you hit the stratosphere and freeze." Caleb looked at a drifting rock the size of a transport truck. It was bobbing gently at waist height. "This place is impossible," he said, shaking his head. "It is like a physics engine having a nervous breakdown." He reached out and pushed the massive boulder. It drifted away from him, weightless as a cloud. "I bet I could ride it," he muttered. "Caleb, do not." Ilara sighed, though she didn't stop walking. "No, seriously," Caleb said, grinning. "It is basic momentum. If I jump on that flat one, I can surf the magnetic current. It saves walking." He ran toward a flat, disc-shaped slab of coral floating near the ground. "Watch this," he shouted. He leaped. He landed on the rock. For a second, he looked triumphant, balancing like a surfer on a wave. Then the rock drifted 6 inches to the left, entering a spin-gravity pocket. The rock flipped instantly, violently upside down. Caleb disappeared. There was a thud, a muffled curse, and then silence. The rock drifted on, revealing Caleb lying face down in the glassy sand, his legs tangled in his scavenger coat. Ilara stopped. She stared at him. "Are you dead?" she asked. "Only my dignity." Caleb groaned into the sand. A sound bubbled up in Ilara's throat. It was foreign, sharp, and startling. She clapped a hand over her mouth, but it escaped anyway. She laughed. It was not the polite social laughter of a liaison. It was a real belly-shaking laugh that made her ribs ache. She doubled over, clutching her knees, the sound ringing out over the harmonic drone of the coral. Caleb rolled over, spitting out sand. He looked at her, offended at first. and then his expression softened. He sat up, wiping the grit from his face, and just watched her laugh. "You know," he said, grinning crookedly. "I would fall on my face 1,000 times if it makes you make that noise," Ilara gasped, trying to regain her composure. She wiped a tear from her eye. She looked at him, and then she looked at her hands. "I have not laughed like that since I was a child," she whispered. "I did not think I could. You can do a lot of things." "Sunshine," Caleb said, standing up and dusting himself off. "You just needed a professional idiot to show you how." Volo watched them from a safe distance, his large eyes uncharacteristically sad. "You two are tragic," he murmured. "You are laughing at the end of the world." The mirror vault rose from the desert like a shard of frozen time. It was not a building in the traditional sense. It was a cathedral grown from liquid crystal, its spires twisting into the sky in impossible geometries. The surface of the structure was a perfect mirror, reflecting the purple storm clouds and the endless desert, making the vault almost invisible until you were standing right in front of it. "This is the archives of the first clan," Ilara said, her voice hushed. "Before the council, before the cities. This is where they stored the origin memories." "How do we get in?" Caleb asked. "I do not see a door." "There is no door," Ilara said. "You have to admit a truth. The crystal reacts to psychosomatic honesty. If you lie, it hardens. If you are true, it becomes permeable." She stepped up to the seamless wall. She placed her hand on the cool surface. She closed her eyes. She did not think of her rank or her codes. She thought of the fear she carried. She thought of the way Caleb's hand felt in hers. She thought of her mother dying in a machine. "I am afraid," she whispered, "and I am angry." The wall rippled like water disturbed by a stone. A tunnel opened, the crystal parting to allow them entry. They stepped inside. The interior was a hall of mirrors, but the reflections were wrong. As they walked down the nave, Caleb looked at his reflection in the walls. He didn't see himself as he was, dirty, tired, wearing a scavenger coat. He saw himself as a child, hiding in a closet while debt collectors pounded on the door. He saw himself stealing the data crystal, his hands shaking. "The vault does not reflect your face," Ilara said, keeping her eyes forward. "It reflects the things you hide. Do not look at the walls." They reached the central altar, a dais where a single massive memory crystal floated in a beam of pure light. "This is it," Volo said, "the prime record." Ilara accessed the interface. It was ancient, predating the modern neural links. She had to place her hands into gel-filled sockets to bridge the connection. "Show us," she commanded. The room darkened. The mirrors ceased reflecting their fears and began to project a hologram that filled the vast space. It was a scene from thousands of years ago. The vile ancestors were there, tall and aquatic, living on the shores of the great ocean. And walking among them were humans. Caleb gasped. They were not slaves. They were not enemies. They were neighbors. The hologram showed humans and Vial building a structure together, a fusion of stone and technology. They were sharing food. They were raising children who played together in the surf. The audio played, a narration in an archaic dialect that the vault translated into their minds. "In the beginning, there was the bond. It was not a resource. It was a bridge. We learned that the resonance between our species could heal, could build, could lift us to the stars." The scene shifted. It showed the first council, a group of vile elders discovering the energy output of the resonance. They saw that a bonded pair produced enough energy to power a city for a year. But free energy meant they lost control. If everyone could create power simply by loving someone, the central authority was obsolete. So they invented the doctrine. The hologram showed the purge. It showed the council soldiers separating the humans and the vile. It showed the burning of the history books. It showed the construction of the first harvesting facilities. They lied, Ilara whispered, tears streaming down her face. It was never about biology. It was never about purity. It was about a monopoly. They made us lonely so they could sell us back our own souls as fuel. Caleb stared at the images of the massacre. He felt sick, but there was more. Ilara. Look at the files from the contact era, Caleb said, pointing to a subdirectory. The human corporations. Ilara opened the file. It was a contract. A digital deed signed by the High Council of Vile and the Board of Directors of the Terra Prime conglomerate, the parent company of Orion, Caleb's employer. The date was recent, 50 years ago. Agreement of exchange, the document read. Terra Prime agrees to supply biological assets, Class C prisoners, debt refugees, undesirable demographics, to the Vile Council for processing. In exchange, Vile Council agrees to provide Terra Prime with exclusive rights to hyperdrive cooling technology. Caleb read the words. He read them again. He stepped back, his legs hitting the altar. Biological assets, he whispered. That is what they called them. That is what they called the girl in the crate. He looked at Ilara. His face was gray. We knew, he said, the humans. My people. The corporations knew exactly what the facilities were. They were not tricked. They were selling us. He fell to his knees. The weight of the betrayal crushed him. He had thought he was fighting an alien evil, a xenophobic empire, but the monster had a human face too. It is not aliens versus humans, he said, his voice cracking. It never was. Ilara knelt beside him. She took his face in her hands. No, she said fiercely. It is not species against species. It is power against life. It is the people who use others against the people who love others. Caleb looked at her. He saw the reflection of his own horror in her eyes, but he also saw a resolve that was harder than diamond. My mother died in that machine, Ilara said. Your people sold her to it. My people built it. We are both children of monsters. Caleb. She pulled him closer, her forehead resting against his. But we do not have to be monsters. Love is not a biological trait. It is not something you are born with. It is a choice. It is a choice you make when the pressure is crushing you. Caleb breathed in her scent, salt and ozone and rain. He held on to her as the world spun around them. You are right, he whispered. We choose. Warning! Volo shouted from the entrance. The mirrors on the walls turned red. The reflection of the outside world showed sleek, black shapes descending from the sky. Gunships. The Council's elite guard, Volo yelled. They tracked the activation of the vault. We have company. We need to upload this record, Ilara said, scrambling to her feet. If the people see that we were once allies, that the corporations are complicit, the war will stop. The fleets will turn on their masters. The upload will take 5 minutes. Volo checked his datapad. We do not have 5 minutes. They are breaching the perimeter. Explosions rocked the vault. The crystal walls screamed as laser fire carved into them. We need a rear guard, Caleb said, drawing his scattergun. No, Volo said. The flamboyant broadcaster stepped forward. He stripped off his sparkling cloak, revealing a vest strapped with high-yield mining explosives. Volo? Ilara asked, her blood running cold. What are you doing? I am buying you time, Volo said. He looked at the massive crystal doors of the vault. I can collapse the entrance. I can seal the nave. It will hold them for 10 minutes. You will be trapped on the outside, Caleb said. Volo smiled. It was a sad, brilliant smile. I have always wanted a captive audience, he said. He looked at Ilara. You tell them. Liaison. You tell them that Volo the Vicious did not die for a joke. Tell them I died for a love story. He turned to Caleb. Take care of her. Human. She has terrible taste in men, clearly, but she deserves a happy ending. Volo! Ilara screamed, reaching for him. Caleb grabbed her. He wrapped his arms around her waist and held her back. Go! Volo shouted. He ran toward the entrance, his arms spread wide as the blast doors shattered inward. A squad of armored Praetorians stormed in. Volo hit the detonator on his chest. This broadcast is concluded, he roared. The explosion was a blinding flash of white. The entrance to the vault collapsed, tons of crystal crashing down to seal the corridor, burying the Praetorians and the brave, foolish broadcaster in a tomb of glass. The shockwave threw Ilara and Caleb to the floor. Silence returned to the vault, broken only by the sound of Ilara's sobbing. They ran. There was a rear exit to the vault, a maintenance sluice that led down into the subterranean aquifer. They scrambled through the narrow, dark tunnels, the sound of Volo's sacrifice ringing in their ears. They reached a dead end, a narrow corridor that terminated in a sealed pressure hatch. The wheel was rusted shut. Caleb threw his weight against it. It didn't budge. Help me! He grunted. Ilara joined him. They pulled until their muscles screamed, but the door was fused by centuries of salt. Behind them, they heard the sound of drilling. The guard was coming through the rubble. We are trapped, Caleb panted, leaning his forehead against the cold metal. Ilara looked at him. They were dirty, bruised, exhausted. They had lost their friend. They were hunted by two civilizations. She reached out and touched his face. Caleb looked at her. His eyes were wide with fear, but when he met her gaze, the fear settled into something else. We might die here, he said. We might. Ilara agreed. She pressed her body against his, crowding him against the rusted door. The space was tight, intimate. The air smelled of stale water and their own sweat. I do not want to die a liaison, she whispered. I do not want to die a symbol. She framed his face with her hands. I want you, Caleb. Not as a rebellion, not to prove a point to the council. I want you because when I look at you, I see the only place in this universe that makes sense. I see home. Caleb closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. He trembled, a fine vibration that ran through his whole body. It terrifies me, he confessed. Loving you. It is the scariest thing I have ever done. Ilara brushed her thumb over his lips. Good. Caleb opened his eyes. It does not erase the fear, he whispered, but it gives it meaning. He kissed her. It was a kiss of absolute clarity. There was no hesitation, no political statement. It was just two terrified people finding a center of gravity in a world that had lost its orbit. It was soft, desperate, and devastatingly real. The bond resonance spiked, and the door clicked. They pulled back, startled. The rusted wheel turned on its own. The bioluminescent moss on the walls flared brighter. The vault, Ilara realized, it reacts to truth. The bond, it unlocked the door. Caleb stared at the wheel. You have got to be kidding me, he breathed. The power of love actually opened the door? That is so cheesy. Ilara laughed, a wet, choked sound. Shut up and push. They shoved the door open and fell into the cool, dark water of the aquifer. The tunnel was submerged, a rapid current pulling them toward the open ocean. They activated the rebreathers in their suits and let the water take them. But they were not alone. as they shot out of the tunnel and into the deep blue of the continental shelf. Ilara's HUD flashed red, signature detected, hunter-killers inbound. Shapes were moving in the deep, sleek metallic predators with fin stabilizers and glowing red eyes. Drone sharks. They are keyed to us, Ilara shouted over the comms. They are tracking the resonance. Swim, Caleb yelled. They kicked hard, their suit thrusters flaring. The drone sharks accelerated, their jaws opening to reveal spinning rows of serrated blades. Ilara pulled her pulse pistol and fired backward. The bolt struck the lead drone, blowing apart its sensor array. It spun wildly, crashing into a coral reef. But there were more. Dozens of them. A swarm of metal teeth. We cannot outrun them, Caleb said. They are too fast. Ilara looked at the map on her HUD. The capital, she said. What? The central relay, Ilara said. It is the hub for the entire planetary grid. It controls the drones, the shields, the power distribution. If we collapse the relay, we blind the sharks. We blind the fleet. We blind the whole planet, Caleb said. The hospitals. The life support systems in the towers. It will be chaos. It is chaos or death, Ilara said. And if we destroy the relay, we destroy the Council's control mechanism. No more harvesting. No more memory edits. We break the chain. It was a terrible choice. To save the future, they had to wreck the present. Do it, Caleb said. They angled their thrusters upward, rocketing toward the surface. The drone sharks snapped at their heels, missing by inches. They breached the surface of the ocean in a shower of spray and foam. The scene that greeted them was apocalyptic. They were in the harbor of the capital. The city of floating towers rose above them. But it was no longer the serene jewel of the ocean. Smoke poured from the spires. Warships hung low in the sky, casting massive shadows over the water. The human fleets were descending from orbit, their engines burning like falling stars. On the seawalls, thousands of Vale citizens were clashing with riot police. The air was filled with the sound of sirens, explosions, and the chanting of the mob. Ilara and Caleb bobbed in the water, two tiny specks in the middle of a war zone. Look at it, Caleb whispered. The central relay stood in the center of the harbor, a massive tower of black metal that hummed with the stolen energy of 1,000,000 harvested souls. It was heavily guarded, surrounded by force fields and patrol skiffs. That is the heart, Ilara said. We have to stop it. Caleb checked his remaining ammunition. He checked the charge on his scattergun. 2 people against an empire, he said. I like those odds. Ilara reached out under the water and took his hand. The drone sharks were circling below, waiting for the kill. The fleets were arming their weapons above. The world held its breath. Ready? Ilara asked. Caleb squeezed her hand. Always. They triggered their thrusters and shot out of the water, flying straight into the teeth of the fire. The capital of Vile was dying, and it was doing so with spectacular beauty. The rain that night was torrential, a curtain of liquid glass that sliced the neon lights of the skyscrapers into bleeding ribbons of violet, azure, and radioactive green. Sirens wailed, a discordant symphony that rose from the flooded streets to the cloud layer, while holographic billboards flickered and died, their power sources diverted to the shields. Ilara and Caleb moved through the chaos like ghosts. They had abandoned the skiff at the harbor's edge, where the water churned with the wake of deploying warships. Now, they were on foot, navigating the labyrinth of the commercial district. The city felt like a magnificent machine coming apart at the rivets. Crowds of citizens surged through the boulevards. It was a riot of confusion. Some carried improvised weapons, lengths of pipe, wrenches, shards of coral, while others simply stood in the rain, staring up at the sky where the human trade fleets were descending like falling stars. "Look at her!" a voice screamed over the din. Ilara kept her head down, her shimmer cloak pulled tight, but the wind caught the hood. A flash of her pale aquatic skin and the silver liaison implant at her temple was visible for a heartbeat. "It is the traitor!" someone yelled. A bottle smashed against the wall inches from her head. "No!" another voice shouted, this one younger, desperate. "She is the one who opened the vault. She is the one who showed us the truth." The crowd fractured. A fistfight broke out between a burly dockworker and a shopkeeper. The vile people were tearing themselves apart, caught between centuries of indoctrination and the sudden, blinding light of revelation. "Keep moving," Caleb shouted, grabbing Ilara's arm. "Do not engage. We are not here to win a debate. We are here to pull the plug." They sprinted down a narrow alleyway, splashing through ankle-deep water that smelled of ozone and fear. Above them, the council's emergency broadcast system roared to life. Giant screens that lined the sides of the floating towers illuminated the rain. High Counselor Theron's face appeared, 10 stories tall. He looked calm, paternal, and terrifying. "Citizens of Vile." Theron's voice boomed, shaking the glass in the windows. "Do not be deceived by the lies of the terrorists. The footage you have seen is a manipulation, a human trick." The screen shifted to show a distorted image of Ilara, looking deranged, her eyes glowing with a sinister red light, a crude digital alteration. "Liaison Ilara has been corrupted," Theron intoned. "Her mind has been broken by the human creature. This is why we have the doctrine. Humans cannot love us. They can only consume us. Look at what she became, a weapon against her own kind." Caleb stopped for a second, looking up at the screen. He wiped rain from his eyes. "They really hate me," he noted. "I mean, I am annoying, but I am not destroy civilization. Annoying. Focus." "Caleb," Ilara snapped, though her hand squeezed his. They burst out of the alley and into the central plaza. And there it was, the central relay. It was a monolith of black metal that pierced the heart of the city, rising from the water like a dark needle. It did not glow with the soft bioluminescence of vile architecture. It hummed. It was a low, subsonic vibration that rattled the teeth and settled in the marrow of the bone. It was the sound of millions of micro-harvests. Every time a citizen felt a pang of loneliness, every time a mother suppressed her love for a child to follow protocol, every time a lover turned away, the relay drank that energy. It was a monument to engineered isolation. The plaza was a war zone. Riot police in riot armor were holding a perimeter around the base of the tower, firing stun rounds into the surging mob. "There are too many of them," Caleb said, crouching behind a statue of a long-dead philosopher. "We cannot blast our way in. We do not have to," Ilara said. She touched her temple. The implant was hot, a fever against her skin. "I have the clearance codes of a third circle liaison. Theron has not revoked them yet." "Why not?" Caleb asked. "He knows you are here. Because he wants me to come inside," Ilara said grimly. "He wants to make an example of me." She stood up. She let the shimmer cloak fall from her shoulders. "Ilara," Caleb hissed. "Trust me," she said. She walked out into the open plaza. The rain plastered her hair to her skull. She walked straight toward the phalanx of riot police. The captain of the guard raised his rifle. "Hold fire!" he shouted, recognizing her. "It is the liaison. Capture her." Theron's voice crackled over the captain's radio. "Bring her to the control deck, unharmed." The guards parted. It was a trap, obvious and gaping, but it was the only way up. Caleb stepped out behind her, his hands raised. surrendering his scattergun. "I am with her," he said. "I am the corrupted influence." The guards grabbed them rough, shackling their wrists. They were marched through the blast doors of the relay into the belly of the beast. The control deck of the relay was a sphere of glass suspended at the pinnacle of the tower. From here, you could see the entire city burning. High Counselor Theron stood by the window, his back to them. He watched the riots below with the detached interest of an entomologist watching ants. "Leave us," Theron commanded. The guards hesitated, then bowed and withdrew, the heavy doors sealing with a hiss of pressurized air. Ilara and Caleb stood alone with the ruler of Vial. "You look tired, Ilara," Theron said, turning around. He did not look like a monster. He looked like an old man carrying a weight too heavy for his spine. "I know the truth, Theron," Ilara said, her voice steady. "We saw the vault. We saw the contracts with the humans." Theron sighed. He walked over to a console and tapped a key. A holographic map of Vial appeared in the center of the room. It showed the planet's core, its tectonic plates, and its magnetic field. The map was flashing red. "You think you found a conspiracy," Theron said softly. "You think we harvest the bond charge because we are greedy? Because we want power?" He gestured to the map. "Look at the core. Ilara, Vial is cooling. Our planet is dying. It has been dying for 1,000 years. The geothermal vents failed centuries ago. The only thing keeping our cities from sinking into the freezing depths, the only thing powering the shields that keep the solar radiation from boiling our oceans, is the bond charge." Ilara stared at the map. The data was undeniable. The energy output required to sustain their civilization was massive, far beyond what their conventional reactors could produce. "We did not invent the doctrine to control you," Theron said. "We invented it to save you. We needed a fuel source that was renewable. And the most potent energy in the universe is the psychobiological resonance of connection." He looked at Caleb with cold pragmatism. "We harvest the longing. We harvest the devotion. Yes, we take the humans and the dissidents and we put them in the pods. It is cruel. It is horrific." He leaned forward. "But it is necessary. Without that energy, the shields fall, the cities sink, everyone dies, not just the prisoners. Everyone." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the ultimate moral trap. The Council had built a paradise on a foundation of torture. But if you removed the torture, the paradise collapsed. "You have a choice. Liaison," Theron said. "You can be the righteous hero, destroy the relay, and watch your people freeze and drown in the dark. Or you can accept the burden of leadership. You can let the machine run. You can save the many by sacrificing the few." Ilara looked at the map. She looked at the burning city below. It was a false choice. It was the logic of a dictator who lacked imagination. "You are lying," Ilara said. Theron blinked. "The data is right there. The problem is real," Ilara said. "But the solution is a lie. You claim we need to steal this energy. You claim we have to hide it." She stepped closer, the shackles on her wrists clinking. "But the vault showed us the past. Our ancestors did not harvest the bond charge from prisoners. They generated it freely. They lived with humans. They bonded openly. The energy was a byproduct of joy, not an extraction of pain." Theron scoffed. "That is a fairy tale. Free bonding is chaotic. It is unpredictable. You cannot run a power grid on romance. We need stability. We need the pods." "No," Ilara said. "You need control. You were afraid that if the people knew they held the power in their own hearts, they would not need a council to ration it for them." She looked at Caleb. There is a third path. Theron, we shut down the harvesting, we tear down the pods, and then we open the borders. We share our technology with the humans. We ask for their help to stabilize the core. We build a new system based on cooperation, not theft. And if the humans refuse? Theron asked. If they attack? Then we fight, Caleb said, speaking for the first time. But we fight as free people, not as parasites. Theron shook his head. You are a child, he said to Alara. You speak of hope when you should be speaking of survival. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small, intricate device. It looked like a remote control. I gave you a chance. Alara, I hoped you would see reason, but you are too far gone. He pressed a button. Alara screamed. The fail-safe in her neural implant triggered. It was not a headache this time. It was a supernova in her skull. The world turned a violent, washing red. The digital overlay slammed down over her vision, rewriting reality. Command override, priority alpha, target identified, enemy combatant. Alara looked at Caleb, but she didn't see Caleb. She saw a soldier in black armor. She saw a demon with a face of shifting shadow. She saw the thing that had killed her mother. Eliminate the target, the voice in her head roared. Kill him to save the city. Ilara's body moved on its own. The conditioning of 20 years of combat training took over. She spun, bringing her shackled wrists up. She grabbed the guard's pistol from the holster of the unconscious man on the floor, a move so fast it was a blur. She leveled the gun at Caleb's chest. Her hand was rock steady. Her breathing was controlled. She was a perfect weapon. Do it, Theron shouted. Show the world what he is. Kill the monster. The cameras in the room were live. Theron was broadcasting this to the screens outside. He wanted the people to see the liaison execute the human terrorist. He wanted to prove that the bond was a lie. Caleb stood there. He was unarmed. He was staring down the barrel of a pulse pistol held by the woman he loved. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't run. He took a step forward. Caleb! Alara screamed, her voice tearing from her throat. Stay back! The gun didn't waver. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The implant was forcing the muscles to contract. Caleb took another step. He was 3 feet away. Shoot him! Theron yelled. Caleb looked past the gun. He looked into Alara's eyes, which were dilated and frantic behind the red haze of the programming. Hey, sunshine, Caleb said softly. Target is speaking. The implant warned. Ignore audio. You look like a sad, angry curtain, Caleb said. It was the stupid joke he had made in the Undercity. It was nonsense. It was code. Alara's finger twitched. The gun dipped a fraction of an inch. Caleb took another step. The barrel of the gun was now pressing against his chest, right over his heart. I know you can hear me, Caleb whispered. I know you are in there. Eliminate, the voice screamed. I hate the rain, Alara whimpered, fighting the command with every neuron she had. Yeah, Caleb said. And you have terrible taste in men. He reached up. He wrapped his hands around hers, over the grip of the gun. He didn't try to wrestle it away, and he just held her hands. Theron stared. This was not following the script. Why aren't you shooting? Theron demanded. Caleb leaned his forehead against the barrel of the gun, looking straight at Alara. Because she is not yours, Caleb said to Theron, but his eyes never left Alara. She never was. He looked at Alara. Come back to me. You promised. The analog anchor. The memory of the resin. The memory of the laughter in the coral desert. The memory of the quiet breathing in the cargo hold. Alara felt the connection. It wasn't the violent, extractive pull of the reactor. It was a steady, warm gravity. It was the feeling of being known. The implant screamed. It tried to override her motor cortex. It tried to force the trigger. But Ilara found something stronger than code. She found rage. She found the absolute furious refusal to be a tool for another second. She didn't fight the implant with logic. She fought it with the sheer volume of her own identity. "Ah, get out of my head," she roared. The scream shattered the silence of the tower. The red overlay cracked. The demon face flickered and became Caleb's tired, kind, unshaven face. Ilara ripped her finger off the trigger. She spun around, breaking Caleb's hold, and leveled the gun at Theron. Theron flinched, backing against the console. "Impossible," he whispered. "The override is absolute. It is hard-coded." Ilara walked toward him. She was shaking, sweat pouring down her face, blood trickling from her nose where the implant was burning out. She stopped in front of the cameras. She looked into the lens, broadcasting to every screen on the planet. "Humans can't love us?" she said. Her voice was raw, bleeding, and magnificent. She gestured to Caleb, who was standing behind her, alive because she had chosen him over the command of a god. "Then explain," Ilara hissed, "why loving him made me impossible to own." She fired. She didn't shoot Theron. She shot the console behind him. The holographic map exploded. The control interface sparked and died. "Now!" Ilara yelled to Caleb. "The upload!" Caleb scrambled to the ruined console. He jammed the data spike from the mirror vault into the emergency port. "Uploading!" he shouted. "The contracts! The history! The proof that the energy crisis is solvable! On the screens outside!" Theron's face was replaced. The footage from the vault began to play. The ancient history of cooperation. The deeds of sale from the corporations. The riot in the plaza stopped. The fighting ceased. Vile citizens looked up. Human soldiers in the descending ships looked at their monitors. They saw the truth. They saw that the war was a transaction. The firing stopped. In the control room, Theron collapsed to his knees. "You have doomed us," he whispered. "The relay. Without the harvest, the core destabilizes in 10 minutes. The city will fall." Ilara looked at the massive black pillar of the relay outside the window. It was still humming, still trying to suck the emotion from the city. "We are not going to let it fall," Ilara said. "We are going to blow it up." "What?" Theron gasped. "The explosion will wipe out the capital." "Not if we change the frequency," Ilara said. She looked at Caleb. "The resonance," she said. "The drone sharks tracked us by the bond. The reactor in the blue sector overloaded because it couldn't process the purity of the connection." Caleb understood instantly. "We use the bond as a counterwave," he said. "We feed the relay a signal so strong, so chaotic, that it forces a system purge. We overload the harvester, but we channel the energy upward, into the atmosphere. It will turn the relay into a lightning rod," Ilara said. "It will fry the tower, but it will spare the city." "How?" Caleb asked. "We need an input." Ilara took his hand. She laced her fingers through his. "We are the input." She dragged him to the central power conduit. There were 2 manual induction pads, designed for emergency technicians. "Place your hand there," she said. Caleb placed his hand on the pad. Ilara placed hers on the other. They looked at each other. "This is going to hurt," Caleb said. "Probably," Ilara smiled. It was a weak, tired smile, but it was hers. Theron watched them, horrified. "You cannot generate that much power. You are just 2 people." Ilara closed her eyes. She didn't try to generate power. She just stopped holding back. She let down the walls she had built for 30 years. She let herself feel everything. The fear, the relief, the grief for Volo, the overwhelming, terrifying love for the human man standing across from her. Caleb did the same. He poured his life into the pad. The relay hummed. Then it groaned. The black metal of the tower began to glow white. Warning. Input exceeding parameters. Warning, resonance critical. The hum rose to a shriek. The tower was trying to drink the ocean through a straw. It couldn't handle the bandwidth of a free, unedited soul. "Let it go!" Ilara shouted. They pushed. The central relay erupted. It was not an explosion of fire. It was an eruption of light. A beam of pure, blinding white energy shot straight up from the tower, piercing the storm clouds, punching a hole through the atmosphere and into the void of space. The feedback loop shattered the harvesting nodes across the city. The hum of loneliness vanished, replaced by the thunder of the discharge. The tower began to crumble. The metal groaned, twisted, and then surrendered to gravity. "Run!" Caleb yelled. They turned and sprinted for the blast doors. They scrambled out onto the catwalk as the control room behind them disintegrated into the beam of light. The tower fell. It was a slow, luminous descent. The massive needle tipped over, crashing into the harbor with the force of a meteor. The impact turned the water to steam. A wall of white fog rolled over the city. The lights in the skyscrapers flickered. The shields wavered. The darkness rushed in. Vial held its breath. Then, one by one, the emergency lights flickered on. Amber, yellow, red. They were not the bright neon lights of the council. They were the backup systems, the localized generators that the dissidents had been preparing for years. The city did not die. It blinked, it stuttered, and then it breathed. Ilara and Caleb collapsed on the metal grating of the seawall, watching the tower sink beneath the boiling waves. Theron was gone, vanished in the chaos, likely to an escape pod. The council was broken, but the remnants would survive. The war was over, but the struggle was just beginning. Ilara lay on her back, staring up at the hole the beam had punched in the clouds. Through the gap, she could see a single star. She coughed, her lungs burning. "Did we win?" she rasped. Caleb rolled over. His face was covered in soot, his scavenger coat torn to shreds. He looked terrible. "We did not die," he said, wheezing. "I count that as a win." He sat up, groaning, and looked at her. "You shot the console," he said. "I did. You shot it while you were brainwashed. That is impressive aim." Ilara sat up slowly. She touched her temple. The implant was silent and it was dead metal. "I was not brainwashed," she said softly. "I was just angry." She looked at the city. The fleets were holding position. The riot police were putting down their shields. The citizens were standing in the streets, looking at the ruins of the tower, realizing that the hum was gone. They were free. And they were terrified. "Now comes the hard part," Caleb said, looking at the darkness where the neon used to be. "Rebuilding, fixing the core, convincing everyone not to kill each other over the last battery." Ilara nodded. "It will be difficult. It will be messy." She looked at Caleb. "But it will be real." They sat there for a long time, the adrenaline fading into a bone-deep exhaustion. The rain had stopped. The fog was lifting. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of resin, the anchor. It was cracked down the middle from the impact. He held it up. "Broken," he said. Ilara reached out and took his hand, the real one. She interlaced her fingers with his, skin against skin, warm and alive. "We do not need the anchor anymore," she said. Caleb squeezed her hand. "So," he said, a grin touching the corner of his mouth. "Now that you are unemployed and a traitor to the state, want to get a synth dog?" Ilara laughed. It was a small sound, but it carried in the quiet air. "I hate those things," she said. "I know." Caleb said, "I will buy you two." They stood up, helping each other rise. They were bruised, bleeding, and uncertain of the future. The politics would be a nightmare. The fear would return. The history of their peoples demanded that they hate each other. But as they walked off the seawall and toward the crowds of survivors gathering in the plaza, they did not let go. They walked into the chaos, hands not clutched in desperation but deliberately linked, a choice made under pressure, a courage practiced daily. They disappeared into the throng of violent humans. Two specks in a galaxy that was finally starting to learn what love costs, and exactly what it saves.